Welcome to a journey through the history of the New York Yankees, one of the most storied franchises in all of professional sports. Tonight, we'll explore the team's origins, from its humble beginnings to its transformation into a baseball dynasty. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the story of the Yankees ease you into rest. Our story begins not in New York, as you might expect, but in Baltimore, in the first year of the 20th century. The year was 1901. A time when baseball was still establishing itself as America's pastime, when the structure of professional baseball as we know it today was just beginning to take shape. The American League had just been founded as a major league, challenging the established National League's monopoly on professional baseball, creating competition and opportunity in cities across the eastern United States. Baltimore was awarded one of these new American League franchises, a team that would be commonly known as the Orioles, playing in a city with a rich baseball tradition that stretched back decades. Baseball had been popular in Baltimore since the 1800s, with various teams representing the city over the years, and the arrival of this new American League club was greeted with enthusiasm by local fans who were eager to support professional baseball in their hometown. The 1901 season marked the beginning, the first games played, the first players taking the field in Baltimore uniforms. The team was competitive enough in those early years, not dominant, but respectable, playing their home games before Baltimore crowds who appreciated the opportunity to watch Major League Baseball without having to travel to other cities. The players were a mix of veterans and younger prospects, men who made their living playing baseball in an era when the sport was far less lucrative than it would eventually become, when players often worked other jobs in the off-season to supplement their modest baseball salaries. But even as the team played through those first couple of seasons, even as they established themselves in Baltimore, financial troubles were brewing beneath the surface. Operating a professional baseball team in the early 1900s was a precarious business proposition. Revenue came almost entirely from ticket sales. There were no television contracts, no merchandise licensing deals, no corporate sponsorships to provide steady income streams. If fans didn't come to games, if the team didn't draw well at the gate, there simply wasn't enough money to sustain operations, to pay players and staff, to maintain the ballpark and equipment. The Baltimore franchise found itself in exactly this difficult position. Despite the city's baseball tradition, despite the enthusiasm of some fans, attendance wasn't strong enough to make the team financially viable. The revenues coming through the turnstiles couldn't cover the costs of running a major league franchise. Losses mounted, debts accumulated, and it became clear that something would have to change if the team was going to survive. The owners were running out of money and running out of options, and the future of the franchise hung in the balance. In the world of early 20th century baseball, when a team found itself in financial distress, the solution often involved finding new ownership with deeper pockets. Preferably ownership in a larger market where attendance potential was greater, where more fans could support the team and generate the revenue needed for sustainability. The Baltimore franchise needed exactly this kind of intervention, needed someone willing to invest in the team and willing to move it to a market where success was more likely. That someone emerged in 1903 when two New York businessmen, Frank Farrell and Bill Devery, stepped forward with an offer to purchase the struggling Baltimore franchise. Farrell and Devery were an interesting pair, men who had made their money in ways that were not entirely respectable by the standards of polite society. Farrell owned gambling establishments and had connections to New York's underworld, while Devery was a former New York City police chief whose tenure had been marked by corruption scandals. These were not pillars of the community or paragons of virtue. These were men who operated in the gray areas of legality, who had accumulated wealth through enterprises that existed on the margins of respectability. But they had money, and they were willing to invest it in baseball. They saw an opportunity in purchasing this struggling Baltimore franchise and relocating it to New York City, where the market was vastly larger, where millions of potential fans lived and worked, where a successful baseball team could generate revenues that would be impossible in smaller cities like Baltimore. New York already had one established team, the National League's Giants, who played at the Polo Grounds and drew well. But Farrell and Devery believed there was room for a second team, that New York's population could support two major league franchises, that fans who couldn't get tickets to Giants games or who wanted an alternative would embrace a new team. The purchase was completed, the deal was finalized, and the franchise that had begun in Baltimore just 2 years earlier was about to undergo a transformation that would change everything. The team would leave Baltimore, would say goodbye to the city that had given it birth, would pack up and move north to New York City, to the nation's largest metropolis, to a market that offered possibilities that Baltimore simply couldn't match. For Baltimore, losing the team after just 2 seasons was a disappointment, another instance of the city's difficulty in maintaining Major League Baseball despite its strong tradition and passionate fans. Baltimore would eventually get Major League Baseball again. The current Orioles franchise would arrive in 1954, but in 1903, the city watched as its American League team departed, taking with it the hopes and investments of those who had supported it during its brief Baltimore tenure. The move to New York in 1903 marked the true beginning of what would become the Yankees franchise, though they weren't called the Yankees yet. That name would come later, in 1913, after a decade of playing under different monikers. But the essential elements were now in place. The team was in New York, positioned in the largest market in the country, ready to begin building an audience and establishing an identity in a city that would become inseparable from the franchise's story. Those early years in New York were not immediately glorious. The team played in a wooden ballpark in Upper Manhattan called Hilltop Park, situated on one of the highest points in the area, which gave the team one of its early nicknames, the Highlanders, after the elevated location of their home field. The park was basic by later standards, with wooden grandstands and limited capacity, but it served its purpose, providing a place for the team to play and for New York fans to watch American League Baseball. The team was mediocre in those first New York seasons, not terrible, but not competitive for championships, drawing modest crowds and struggling to match the popularity of the Giants, who were the established team in the city with deeper roots and greater success. But Farrell and Devery had made their investment, had brought Major League Baseball to New York in the American League, and had set in motion something that would eventually grow beyond anything they could have imagined. The franchise that began in Baltimore in 1901, that struggled financially and faced an uncertain future, had found new life in New York. The journey from Baltimore to New York, from the Orioles to the Highlanders, from financial distress to new opportunity, marked the crucial first chapter in what would become one of the most successful franchises in the history of professional sports. Those early years were humble, uncertain, marked by financial struggles and the challenges of establishing a new team in a competitive market. But the foundation was being laid. The team was in New York, playing in the American League, beginning to build a fan base and an identity. The ownership was committed, however questionable their backgrounds might have been, to making the franchise work in its new home. Players were taking the field each season, competing, developing, creating the first memories and the first moments of what would eventually become Yankees history. As we think about these origins, about that franchise born in Baltimore and reborn in New York, we're reminded that every great story has a beginning, and not every beginning hints at the greatness that will follow. The early years were modest, the team was ordinary, and nothing about those first seasons in New York suggested that this franchise would become synonymous with excellence, would win more championships than any other team in baseball history, would become an institution that transcended sports to become part of American cultural identity. But those early years mattered. They established the franchise in New York, planted the seeds that would eventually grow into something magnificent, created the foundation upon which everything else would be built. From Baltimore to New York, from the Orioles to the Highlanders to eventually the Yankees, from financial struggle to the beginning of a long journey toward baseball immortality. This was how it all started, over a century ago, when two businessmen with questionable backgrounds but genuine ambition brought a struggling franchise to the nation's greatest city and set in motion a story that continues to unfold today. As the franchise settled into its new home in New York City, as players took the field in their new city for the first time, the team needed an identity, a name that would distinguish them from other clubs and connect them to their new home. The solution came from the location of their ballpark, from the geography of Upper Manhattan, from a hill that would give the team its first New York nickname. Hilltop Park sat in Washington Heights, in the northern reaches of Manhattan, built on one of the highest elevations in the entire borough. The land rose above the surrounding areas, creating a natural prominence that made the ballpark visible from a distance, that gave it a commanding position in the neighborhood. This elevated location wasn't just a geographic quirk. It became the inspiration for the team's name during these early New York years. They would be called the New York Highlanders, a reference to their hilltop home, a name that captured something distinctive about where they played. The ballpark itself was a wooden structure, built quickly and inexpensively to provide a home for the relocated franchise. Construction had been completed in just 6 weeks during the spring of 1903, a remarkably short time frame that reflected both the urgency of getting the team ready to play and the relatively simple construction methods of the era. Wooden grandstands surrounded the field, providing seating for around 16,000 fans when full, though attendance rarely approached capacity in those early seasons when the team was still establishing itself in the New York market. The location in Washington Heights placed the ballpark far from the center of Manhattan's activity, far from the densest population areas where most New Yorkers lived and worked. Fans who wanted to attend games had to make a journey, had to travel by streetcar or elevated train to reach the northern reaches of the island, investing time and effort to see a team that hadn't yet given them much reason to make that trip. The distance from population centers was a challenge for attendance, for building a fan base, for competing with the Giants, who played at the more centrally located and more accessible Polo Grounds. But the name Highlanders had appeal. It evoked images of Scottish Highlands, of rugged terrain and proud tradition, of a certain dignified strength. And there was another connection that made the name particularly fitting. The team's president, Joseph Gordon, had Scottish heritage. Whether this was a deliberate reference to Gordon's background or simply a happy coincidence, the Scottish connection added another layer of meaning to the Highlanders' nickname, giving it roots in both geography and the personal history of the team's leadership. Gordon was one of the businessmen who had become involved with the franchise after Farrell and Devery purchased it and moved it to New York. He served as team president during these early years, helping to guide the franchise through the challenges of establishing itself in a new city, navigating the business and political complexities of operating a baseball team in New York's competitive and complicated sports landscape. His Scottish heritage, whether coincidentally or deliberately, aligned perfectly with the Highlanders' name, creating a connection between the team's identity and its leadership. So the New York Highlanders took the field in 1903, playing their home games at Hilltop Park, representing the American League in New York, competing for fans and attention in a city that already had an established National League team. The early results were mixed, some seasons better than others, but never quite good enough to challenge for championships, never quite compelling enough to capture the city's imagination in the way the Giants had already done. But even as the team established itself as the Highlanders, even as that became the official name and the way most people referred to the club, something else was happening in the world of newspapers and sports reporting. Journalists who covered the team, who wrote about their games and their players, faced a practical problem that had nothing to do with baseball and everything to do with the constraints of newspaper layout and headline writing. In the early 20th century, newspapers were the primary source of sports information for fans. There was no radio yet, no television, no internet. If you wanted to know how your team had done, you read about it in the newspaper the next day. Sports sections would carry game reports, box scores, and headlines announcing the results. And those headlines had to fit in limited space, had to convey information quickly and clearly while fitting within the column width and typographical constraints of newspaper printing. Highlanders was a long word. Too long, really, for convenient headline writing. Newspaper editors and compositors, the people responsible for laying out the pages and setting the type, found themselves struggling to fit Highlanders into headlines, finding that it took up too much space, that it made creating clean, readable headlines more difficult than it needed to be. They needed something shorter, something that would convey the same information but fit more easily into the limited space available. The solution came naturally, organically, from the everyday language people already used. New Yorkers were often called Yankees, a term that had existed for generations to describe Americans from the northern states, particularly those from New York and New England. During the Civil War, Yankee had been the term Southerners used for Union soldiers, for the Northerners they fought against. But it was older than that, stretching back to colonial times, a word whose origins were murky, but whose meaning was clear. A Yankee was someone from the North, particularly from the New York area. So newspapermen, looking for a shorter way to refer to the New York Highlanders in headlines, began using Yankees or the even shorter Yanks. It fit perfectly, just 7 letters for Yankees, just 5 for Yanks, compared to 12 letters for Highlanders. The space savings were significant, making headline writing easier, making layouts cleaner, solving a practical problem that editors faced every day. The shortened name appeared in newspapers with increasing frequency through the early years of the 20th century. A headline might read, "Yanks defeat Boston," or "Yankees win series," rather than struggling to fit Highlanders into the available space. Readers understood immediately what the shortened name meant, accepted it without confusion, and began using it themselves in casual conversation. The nickname spread organically, driven by the practical needs of newspaper production, but embraced by fans and the general public as a natural, convenient way to refer to the team. For several years, both names coexisted. The official name remained the Highlanders, but in common usage, in newspaper headlines and casual conversation, they were increasingly called the Yankees. The team didn't resist this evolution, didn't insist on exclusive use of the Highlanders' name. They understood that language evolves, that nicknames emerge from usage rather than official decree, that fighting against a popular nickname was futile and counterproductive. The situation resolved itself in 1913, when the team made a significant change to where they played their home games. Hilltop Park had never been ideal, too far from population centers, built quickly and cheaply, lacking the amenities and capacity of better ballparks. After a decade of playing there, after struggling with limited attendance and the challenges of the location, the team made arrangements to leave Hilltop Park and move to a different venue. The Polo Grounds, home of the National League's New York Giants, was a much better facility, larger and more modern, located in Upper Manhattan in a more accessible location than Hilltop Park had been. The Giants, who owned the ballpark, agreed to allow the Highlanders to become tenants, to share the facility and play their home games there. It was an unusual arrangement, 2 teams from competing leagues sharing the same ballpark, but it made practical sense for both organizations. The Giants would receive rental income, and the Highlanders would have a better home venue that might help them attract larger crowds. The move to the Polo Grounds in 1913 marked the end of the Highlanders' name. When the team left Hilltop Park, the geographic connection that had inspired the nickname disappeared. They were no longer playing on the hilltop, no longer the team from the heights, and continuing to call them Highlanders would have made less sense. At the same time, the Yankees' nickname had become so widely used, so thoroughly established in common parlance and newspaper usage, that adopting it as the official name was simply acknowledging reality. So in 1913, when they became tenants at the Polo Grounds, the team officially became the New York Yankees. The name that newspapers had been using for convenience, that fans had adopted in casual usage, became the formal identity of the franchise. The transition was smooth, uncontroversial, barely noticed by many fans who had already been calling them the Yankees for years. The Highlanders' era was over, lasting just a decade, a period of modest success and establishing the franchise in New York, but not yet achieving the greatness that would define the organization in later years. Those 10 years at Hilltop Park, playing under the Highlanders' name, were important for what they established: a presence in New York, a growing fan base, a foundation upon which to build. But they were also just a beginning, a first chapter that would soon give way to something larger and more significant. The Yankees' name, born from the practical needs of newspaper headline writers, would become one of the most famous and recognizable names in all of sports. What started as journalistic shorthand, as a convenient way to save space in headlines, became an identity that would last over a century and counting, that would become synonymous with baseball excellence, that would represent a franchise that won more championships than any other in the sport's history. But in 1913, as the team moved into the Polo Grounds and officially adopted the Yankees' name, none of that glory had arrived yet. They were still a middling team, still struggling to compete with the Giants for New York fans' attention and loyalty, still searching for the success that would justify their existence and validate the decision to bring the franchise to New York a decade earlier. The name had changed from Highlanders to Yankees. The home had changed from Hilltop Park to the Polo Grounds, but the team's fortunes had not yet changed in any fundamental way. That transformation was coming, though. The pieces that would build a dynasty were beginning to fall into place, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The Yankees' name was now official, creating the identity under which all future success would be achieved. The team had a better home ballpark, giving them the venue they needed to attract larger crowds and generate more revenue. And ownership changes were on the horizon that would bring new leadership with grander visions and deeper pockets. The Highlanders' era had been about survival and establishment, about putting down roots in New York and building something that could endure. The Yankees' era, just beginning in 1913, would be about something more, about ambition and achievement, about building not just a team but a dynasty, about transforming a modest franchise into the most successful organization in baseball history. But all of that was still ahead, still waiting to unfold in the years and decades to come. Through the early years of the 20th century, as the franchise established itself in New York, as it transitioned from Highlanders to Yankees, as it moved from Hilltop Park to the Polo Grounds, there was a persistent problem that overshadowed everything else. The team simply wasn't very good. Season after season, year after year, the Yankees took the field and failed to compete for championships, failed to challenge the league's best teams, failed to give their fans reason to believe that success was just around the corner. The numbers tell a stark story. For their first 18 seasons in New York, from 1903 when they arrived from Baltimore through 1920, the Yankees were largely uncompetitive, mediocre at best, nowhere close to the dominant force they would eventually become. They finished in the upper half of the standings occasionally, had a few respectable seasons where they won more games than they lost, but they never seriously contended for the American League pennant, never made fans believe that a championship was within reach. 18 years is a long time in baseball, nearly 2 decades of futility and disappointment, of watching other teams celebrate while your own team struggled through another forgettable season. For fans who supported the Yankees during these early years, who invested their time and money and emotional energy in following a team that rarely rewarded that investment with success, it must have been frustrating beyond measure. Every spring brought hope, the eternal optimism that comes with a new season, the belief that maybe this year would be different, that maybe the team had improved enough to compete. And every fall brought the same disappointing reality. Another season finished, another year without a championship, another long winter to endure before trying again. The reasons for this extended mediocrity were complex, rooted in how the franchise was being operated, in the priorities and capabilities of the ownership group that controlled the team's destiny. Frank Farrell and Bill Devery, the two men who had purchased the franchise in 1903 and brought it to New York, were not ideal owners for a baseball team that aspired to greatness. Their backgrounds, their interests, their approach to business, all of it worked against building a championship organization. Farrell, as we discussed earlier, had made his money in gambling establishments, operating in the gray areas between legal and illegal enterprise, connected to New York's underworld in ways that made respectable society uncomfortable. His world was one of odds and risk, of short-term gains and quick profits, of operations that existed in shadows and relied on connections rather than transparent business practices. Devery, the former police chief, carried his own baggage of corruption allegations and questionable dealings, a man who had wielded power in ways that benefited himself more than the public he was supposed to serve. These were not men whose primary passion was baseball. They had purchased the franchise as a business investment, as an opportunity to make money and perhaps enhance their status in New York society. But their attention was divided, their focus scattered across various interests and pursuits. Farrell was still involved in his gambling operations, still managing those enterprises that generated most of his income. Devery had his own business interests and political connections to maintain. The Yankees were just one piece of their portfolios, and not necessarily the piece they cared about most deeply or managed most attentively. More problematically, both men were more interested in extracting value from the franchise than in investing resources into building a winner. A successful baseball team requires investment in player salaries to attract and retain talent, in scouting systems to identify promising prospects, in training facilities and equipment, in all the infrastructure that supports competitive excellence. But investment means spending money, reducing short-term profits, accepting smaller returns today in exchange for potentially larger returns tomorrow. And Farrell and Devery were not inclined toward that kind of patient, long-term thinking. They ran the Yankees on the cheap, keeping payroll low, spending minimally on player acquisition, operating the franchise as a cash extraction vehicle rather than as a competitive sports organization. When talented players became available, when opportunities arose to improve the roster through trades or signings, the Yankees often couldn't or wouldn't spend the money necessary to bring in the talent that might have made them competitive. The result was a roster perpetually stocked with players who weren't quite good enough, who were affordable rather than exceptional, who could fill out a lineup but couldn't carry a team to championships. This approach created a vicious cycle that was difficult to escape. The team wasn't very good, which meant attendance was mediocre, which meant revenue was limited, which meant there wasn't money to invest in better players, which meant the team stayed mediocre, which meant attendance stayed low. Breaking out of this cycle required ownership willing to invest their own capital, willing to accept losses in the short term to build something better for the future. But Farrell and Devery weren't those kind of owners. They wanted the team to pay for itself, to generate profits without requiring significant capital infusion from their own pockets. The situation was made worse by the relationship between Farrell and Devery themselves. The two men, despite being business partners in the Yankees venture, did not get along particularly well. They disagreed about how to run the team, about business decisions large and small, about who should have final authority over various aspects of the operation. These disagreements created dysfunction at the ownership level, making it difficult to implement coherent long-term strategies, making it hard to build organizational stability when the two men at the top were frequently at odds with each other. The lack of investment and the ownership dysfunction had predictable results on the field. The Yankees assembled rosters of journeyman players, solid professionals who could play the game competently, but who lacked the exceptional talent needed to compete with the best teams in the league. They had occasional standout players. Every team does, through luck or astute evaluation, but not enough of them, and not the kind of sustained excellence across the roster that championship teams require. Season after season played out in familiar patterns. The Yankees would start with hope, would play reasonably well for stretches, would occasionally beat good teams, and create moments of optimism. But they couldn't sustain success, couldn't put together the kind of complete seasons that championship contenders need. They would fade as summer turned to fall, would slip in the standings, would finish comfortably behind the league's best teams, would send their fans home disappointed once again. The American League during these years had its dominant teams, franchises that won pennants and competed in the World Series, that gave their fans championships to celebrate and memories to cherish. The Boston Red Sox won the World Series multiple times during this period, building their own legacy of success, while the Yankees languished in mediocrity. The Philadelphia Athletics, under the legendary manager Connie Mack, assembled powerhouse teams that dominated the league, winning championships with rosters full of exceptional talent. The Detroit Tigers, led by the great Ty Cobb, contended regularly, reaching the World Series and competing at the highest level. And the Yankees? They watched from afar, not competitive with these powers, not part of the championship conversation, still trying to establish themselves as a legitimate franchise worthy of New York fans' attention and loyalty. The contrast must have been painful for Yankees supporters, seeing other teams celebrate championships while their own team couldn't even contend, watching excellence flourish elsewhere while mediocrity persisted at home. The situation was particularly galling because New York's National League team, the Giants, were successful during this period, winning pennants and World Series championships, giving their fans exactly what Yankees fans were being denied. The Giants played in the same ballpark, the Polo Grounds, that the Yankees called home after 1913, creating the uncomfortable dynamic of watching the more successful team celebrate in the very venue where the Yankees played their own forgettable seasons. The comparison was constant, unavoidable, a daily reminder that success was possible in New York baseball, just not with the Yankees. For 18 years, this was the reality of Yankees baseball. Modest rosters assembled on modest budgets by owners more interested in other pursuits than in building a winner. Seasons that started with hope and ended in disappointment. A franchise that existed but didn't excel, that played but didn't win, that had established itself in New York but hadn't yet justified that presence with anything approaching success. But cycles of futility don't last forever in baseball. Ownership groups change, new money comes in, priorities shift, and franchises that have languished can suddenly transform into powerhouses if the right elements align. For the Yankees, that transformation was approaching, though nobody could quite see it yet in the midst of another disappointing season, another year of modest results and unfulfilled potential. The early struggles, the 18 years of mediocrity under Farrell and Devery, would eventually be looked back on as the dark years, the period before greatness arrived, the time when the Yankees were just another team rather than the Yankees as the world would come to know them. But those years mattered in their own way, establishing the franchise in New York, building a fan base that would eventually have something to celebrate, creating the foundation, however shaky, upon which something magnificent would eventually be constructed. The struggles were real, the disappointments genuine, but they were not permanent. Change was coming, though it would require new ownership, new vision, and the acquisition of a player whose impact would transform everything. As the Yankees stumbled through the 1910s, as another season of mediocrity gave way to another off-season of modest hope, as the cycle of disappointment continued under Farrell and Devery's unfocused ownership, forces were aligning that would finally break the franchise free from its long period of futility. Change was coming, the kind of transformational change that would reshape not just the Yankees, but the entire landscape of baseball. And it would begin with new ownership, with men who saw potential where others saw only an underperforming franchise lost in the shadow of the giants. In 1915, two wealthy New Yorkers, Jacob Ruppert and Tillinghast Lahamadu Houston, purchased the Yankees from Farrell and Devery. The sale price was $460,000, a substantial sum for the era, reflecting the value of owning a major league franchise in New York even if that franchise hadn't yet achieved success. Ruppert and Houston were cut from different cloth than the previous owners, men with deeper pockets and broader visions, men who saw the Yankees not as a side investment to be milked for whatever profits could be extracted, but as an opportunity to build something significant, something that could compete with and eventually surpass the Giants as New York's premier baseball franchise. Jacob Ruppert was a brewing magnate, having inherited his family's successful brewery business and expanded it into one of the largest in New York. He was wealthy, connected in New York society, a man who understood business and who had the financial resources to invest in the Yankees properly, to spend money on talent, to build an organization that could compete for championships. His money came from beer, from the production and sale of a product that New Yorkers consumed in enormous quantities, generating profits that gave Ruppert the capital he needed to transform the Yankees from orphans into champions. Tillinghast Houston, everyone called him Cap, a nickname from his military service, had made his fortune in engineering and construction, building projects in Cuba and elsewhere that had generated substantial wealth. He was more rough-hewn than Ruppert, less polished in social graces, but equally committed to making the Yankees successful. The two men complemented each other in some ways, bringing different skills and perspectives to the ownership partnership, though they would eventually have disagreements that would lead to Ruppert buying out Houston's share of the team. When Ruppert and Houston took control of the Yankees, they assessed what they had purchased with clear eyes and honest appraisal. What they saw was not encouraging. The team was mediocre, the roster was thin on talent, the organizational infrastructure was inadequate, and the franchise had no real identity or direction. Ruppert reportedly called the Yankees an orphan franchise when they purchased it, a team that had been neglected by its previous owners, that had been allowed to drift without proper guidance or investment, that needed someone to take it in hand and give it purpose and resources. The new owners set about making changes immediately. They invested in scouting, bringing in people who could identify talent and help build a stronger roster. They were willing to spend money on players' salaries, to compete in the marketplace for talent rather than settling for whoever was affordable. They improved the business operations, professionalizing the franchise in ways that Farrell and Devery had never bothered to do. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Building a championship organization takes time, but the direction was clear from the start. The Yankees under Ruppert and Houston would be run properly, would be given the resources they needed, would no longer be the orphan franchise but a serious competitor in the American League. The improvements showed in the standings. By 1919, the Yankees were competitive, finishing with 80 wins and third place in the American League, their best finish in years. They had talented players emerging, including young pitchers and position players who showed promise for the future. The franchise was heading in the right direction, was building something that looked like it might eventually contend for championships. But they were still missing something, still lacking the kind of transcendent talent that could push them from competitive to dominant, from good to great. And then, in the winter of 1919-20, came the transaction that would change everything, that would transform the Yankees from an improving team into a dynasty, that would alter the balance of power in baseball and create one of the most famous player acquisitions in the history of professional sports. The Yankees purchased Babe Ruth from the Boston Red Sox. George Herman Ruth, everyone knew him as Babe, was already a star when the Yankees acquired him, though his stardom was about to reach heights that nobody, not even Ruth himself, could have fully anticipated. He had begun his career as a pitcher with the Red Sox, and an exceptional one, winning games and helping Boston capture World Series championships in 1915, 1916, and 1918. He was one of the best left-handed pitchers in baseball, with a powerful fastball and the kind of competitive fire that made him successful in big games. But Ruth could also hit. His power at the plate was becoming increasingly evident, and the Red Sox had begun using him in the outfield on days when he wasn't pitching, trying to get his bat in the lineup as often as possible. In 1919, his last season with Boston, Ruth hit 29 home runs, a staggering total for that era when home runs were relatively rare, when baseball was played as much through bunting and base running and manufacturing runs as through power hitting. Ruth's 29 home runs shattered the previous single-season record, announcing to the baseball world that something different was happening, that this player was capable of offensive production that seemed to belong to a different game entirely. The Red Sox owner, Harry Frazee, needed money. He was a theater producer whose shows were struggling financially, and he saw the Yankees offer to purchase Ruth as an opportunity to solve his immediate cash problems. The sale price was $100,000, an enormous sum for a player transaction at that time, the most ever paid for a baseball player. Frazee took the money, used it to finance his theatrical ventures, and sent Babe Ruth to New York, completing a transaction that Red Sox fans would curse for generations, that would be remembered as perhaps the worst trade in baseball history. For the Yankees, acquiring Ruth was the defining moment, the transaction that launched their transformation into a dynasty. Ruth arrived in New York for the 1920 season, and what followed exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Playing full-time in the outfield rather than splitting time between pitching and hitting, Ruth exploded offensively in ways that seemed almost impossible. He hit 54 home runs in 1920, nearly doubling his own record from the previous year, a total that was more than any other entire team in baseball hit that season. 54 home runs from one player when most teams couldn't hit half that many collectively. The impact was immediate and profound. Fans flocked to see Ruth, to watch him hit those towering home runs that traveled distances nobody had seen before, that left ballparks with trajectories that seemed to defy physics. Attendance soared wherever the Yankees played, with fans in every American League city buying tickets specifically to see Babe Ruth, to witness this phenomenon in person. The Yankees, who had struggled to attract fans for years, suddenly became the biggest draw in baseball, with Ruth as the attraction that brought people to ballparks in unprecedented numbers. Ruth changed how baseball was played, shifted the sport's emphasis from the dead ball era's focus on bunting and base running and manufacturing runs to a new era where power hitting became central, where the home run became the most exciting play in the game, where fans came to the ballpark hoping to see the ball leave the yard. He made the Yankees relevant, made them exciting, made them the team that everyone wanted to watch, whether you supported them or hated them. And he made them winners. With Ruth anchoring the lineup, the Yankees became immediate contenders. In 1921, they won the American League pennant, their first in franchise history, reaching the World Series and losing to the Giants in what was a disappointment, but also validation that the franchise had arrived as a serious power. They won the pennant again in 1922, again losing to the Giants in the World Series, coming close, but not quite achieving the ultimate goal. And then came 1923, the year everything came together. The Yankees had moved into their own ballpark, Yankee Stadium, which we'll discuss more later, leaving the Polo Grounds and the uncomfortable arrangement of being tenants of their crosstown rivals. Ruth was at the peak of his powers, hitting 41 home runs and leading an offense that was the most productive in baseball. The pitching was strong, the defense solid, and the team dominated the American League, winning 98 games and cruising to another pennant. This time, in the World Series, the Yankees would not be denied. They faced the Giants once again, the team that had beaten them in the previous two World Series, the team that had lorded over them as New York's superior franchise for 2 decades. And the Yankees won, defeating the Giants 4-2, capturing the franchise's first World Series championship, validating everything Ruppert and Houston had invested, everything the fans had hoped for, everything Babe Ruth represented. The celebration in New York was enormous, with Yankees fans finally able to claim what Giants fans had enjoyed for years: a championship, a World Series title, the validation of being the best team in baseball. The long years of mediocrity, the 18 seasons of futility under Farrell and Devery, the decades of being second-class citizens in New York baseball, all of it was washed away in the joy of that championship. The Yankees had arrived, had become champions, had proven that the investment and the vision and the acquisition of Babe Ruth had been worth it all. From orphan franchise to world champions in just 8 years under new ownership. From also-rans to dynasty in the span of less than a decade. The transformation was complete, the foundation established for what would become the most successful franchise in baseball history. Ruppert and Houston had provided the resources and the vision. Babe Ruth had provided the transcendent talent and the drawing power that made everything possible. Together, they had taken a struggling franchise that nobody cared much about and turned it into champions, into the team that would define baseball excellence for generations to come. As thoughts drift toward sleep, perhaps the image of Babe Ruth comes to mind. That rotund figure with the distinctive swing, pointing to where the home run would go, trotting around the bases after another prodigious blast, giving Yankees fans something to celebrate after so many years of disappointment. The orphan franchise had found its champion, and baseball would never be quite the same. The 1920s had belonged to Babe Ruth and the emerging Yankees dynasty, with that first championship in 1923 opening the floodgates to sustained success. But as the calendar turned to a new decade, as America entered the 1930s and the Great Depression gripped the nation, the Yankees entered what would be remembered as their first true golden age, a period of dominance so complete, so overwhelming, that it established them as the premier franchise in all of baseball. From 1932 through 1939, a span of just 8 seasons, the New York Yankees won 5 World Series championships, 5 titles in 8 years. It was a level of dominance that baseball had rarely seen, that established the Yankees as not just successful, but dynastically superior, that created an expectation of championship success that would define the franchise for generations to come. While America struggled through the worst economic crisis in its history, while families lost jobs and homes and savings, the Yankees provided escape and excellence, giving fans something to celebrate even when much of life felt uncertain and difficult. The 1932 championship came first, with a Yankees team loaded with talent sweeping the Chicago Cubs in 4 games. This World Series would be remembered particularly for one legendary moment: Babe Ruth's alleged called shot in Game 3, when he supposedly pointed to the center field bleachers before hitting a home run to that exact spot. Whether Ruth actually called his shot or whether the legend grew in the retelling remains debated to this day, but the story captured imaginations and became part of baseball folklore, another entry in the growing mythology of Yankees greatness. But by the 1930s, Babe Ruth was no longer the only star in the Yankees lineup. Playing alongside him, batting directly behind him in the order, protecting him and benefiting from the protection Ruth provided, was another player who would become equally legendary, though in very different ways. Lou Gehrig was everything Ruth wasn't: quiet where Ruth was flamboyant, modest where Ruth was boastful, disciplined where Ruth was indulgent. But on the baseball field, Gehrig was every bit Ruth's equal, a devastating hitter who combined power and consistency in ways that made him one of the most productive players in baseball history. Gehrig had joined the Yankees in 1923, the same year they won their first World Series, and he quickly established himself as a cornerstone of the lineup. He hit for average and for power, drove in runs in staggering numbers, and played first base with reliable competence, if not spectacular flair. Year after year, season after season, Gehrig produced, putting up numbers that would have made him the star of almost any other team, but that sometimes got overlooked because he played alongside the larger-than-life Babe Ruth. But what truly set Gehrig apart, what made him unique even among the great players of his era, was his durability and his consistency. Gehrig played every single day. He never took days off, never asked for rest, never sat out games for minor injuries or fatigue. On June 1, 1925, he entered the Yankees lineup as a replacement for an injured player, and from that day forward, he played in every Yankees game for the next 14 years. Every single one. Not a day off, not a game missed, not a moment when he wasn't in the lineup doing his job. The streak accumulated almost without anyone paying much attention at first. 100 consecutive games, then 200, then 500. Still, Gehrig played every day, showing up, taking his position at first base, batting in the heart of the order, producing with remarkable consistency. The streak became part of his identity, a symbol of his work ethic and his reliability, of his determination to be there for his team regardless of how he felt, regardless of injuries or illness or fatigue. By the time the streak reached 2,000 games, it had become remarkable, a testament to durability that seemed almost superhuman. And Gehrig kept playing, kept adding to the total, kept showing up every single day. The final number, when the streak eventually ended in 1939 under circumstances we'll discuss shortly, was 2,130 consecutive games played. 2,130 games without a break, without a day off, without missing even a single contest. For over half a century, that streak would stand as a record that seemed unbreakable, a monument to consistency and durability that defined Lou Gehrig's career as much as his impressive offensive statistics. But Gehrig was more than just durable. He was spectacularly productive. On June 3, 1932, in a game against the Philadelphia Athletics at Shibe Park, Gehrig accomplished something that had never been done in the modern era of baseball. He hit 4 home runs in a single game. For times he came to the plate. For times he connected with the pitch. For times the ball sailed over the outfield fence and into the seats. It was a display of power hitting that seemed almost impossible, the kind of performance that happens once in a generation, if that. Hitting 1 home run in a game is an achievement. Hitting 2 is a great day. Hitting 3 puts you in rare company. But 4 home runs in one game was unprecedented in modern baseball, a feat that demonstrated the kind of power Gehrig possessed, the kind of ability to dominate that made him one of the most feared hitters in the sport. The 4 home run game became another entry in Gehrig's growing legend, another moment that would be remembered and discussed for decades. Through the 1930s, as the Yankees continued winning championships, Gehrig remained the constant, the player you could count on to be in the lineup and to produce. The 1936 season brought another World Series title, with the Yankees defeating the Giants. The 1937 season brought yet another championship, with the Yankees again proving they were the best team in baseball. And in 1938, they won again, their 3rd consecutive championship, dominating the sport with a consistency that was almost monotonous for everyone except Yankees fans. But as the 1939 season began, something was wrong with Lou Gehrig. The man who had played through everything, who had never missed a game in 14 years, who had been the picture of health and consistency, was struggling. His batting average was plummeting, his power had disappeared, and his movements on the field seemed labored, almost clumsy. Something was affecting his coordination, his strength, his ability to perform at the level he had maintained for so long. On May 2, 1939, in Detroit, Lou Gehrig removed himself from the Yankees lineup. After 2,130 consecutive games, the streak was over. Gehrig told manager Joe McCarthy that he wasn't helping the team, that he was hurting them by staying in the lineup when he clearly wasn't capable of playing at his usual level. It was a decision that demonstrated the same selflessness that had characterized his entire career, putting the team first, even when it meant ending the streak that had defined him. The medical diagnosis, when it came, was devastating. Gehrig was suffering from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that would eventually be known popularly as Lou Gehrig's disease because of his connection to it. ALS was a death sentence, a condition with no cure and no hope of recovery, a disease that would gradually rob Gehrig of his physical abilities until he could no longer walk, no longer speak, no longer perform even the most basic functions. The doctors gave him perhaps 2 years to live. The news shocked the baseball world and devastated Yankees fans who had watched Gehrig play for 16 seasons, who had come to see him as indestructible, as the player who was always there, always reliable, always performing. To learn that he was sick, that he was dying, that the consecutive game streak had ended not because of a minor injury or a need for rest, but because of a fatal disease, it was almost too much to process. On July 4, 1939, the Yankees held Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day at Yankee Stadium, bringing together teammates past and present to honor the dying first baseman. Over 61,000 fans filled the stadium, coming to pay tribute to a player who had given them so much, who had represented everything good about baseball and sportsmanship. Gehrig, visibly weakened by the disease but determined to address the crowd, gave a speech that would become one of the most famous in American sports history. Standing at a microphone at home plate, his voice echoing through the stadium, Gehrig told the crowd that despite everything, despite the disease, despite knowing he was dying, despite having to leave the game he loved, he considered himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. He spoke of his gratitude for having played baseball, for having been a Yankee, for having had teammates and fans and experiences that had enriched his life beyond measure. There were tears in the stadium that day, among fans and players alike, as everyone present understood they were witnessing something profound, a moment of grace and dignity in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Baseball's rules typically required a player to be retired for 5 years before becoming eligible for the Hall of Fame, but in Gehrig's case, an exception was made immediately. The Hall of Fame waived the waiting period and inducted Lou Gehrig in 1939, recognizing that waiting 5 years would mean Gehrig might not live to see the honor. He was elected unanimously, a testament to his career achievements and to the respect he had earned throughout baseball. And the Yankees, playing through that 1939 season with heavy hearts, with Lou Gehrig sitting in the dugout in his uniform despite being unable to play, honored their fallen teammate in the most fitting way possible. They won the World Series. Again, their 4th consecutive championship, their 5th title of the decade, achieved in a season that was bittersweet, triumphant on the field but shadowed by the knowledge of what was happening to Gehrig. The 1930s had been the Yankees' first golden age, a decade of dominance that established them as baseball royalty. 5 World Series championships in 8 years. Babe Ruth's final seasons in pinstripes before he retired in 1935. Lou Gehrig's incredible consecutive game streak and his tragic illness that ended his career and would soon end his life. Joe DiMaggio's arrival in 1936, bringing a new star to replace the aging Ruth and to carry the franchise forward into the next era. The decade had everything: triumph and tragedy, individual brilliance and team success, moments of joy and moments of heartbreak. For Lou Gehrig, the end came on June 2, 1941, just 2 years after his retirement, just as the doctors had predicted. He died at age 37, his body destroyed by ALS, but his legacy secure as one of the greatest players in baseball history and one of the most admirable figures in American sports. His number 4 was retired by the Yankees, the first number retirement in baseball history, ensuring that no other Yankees player would ever wear Gehrig's number, that his place in franchise history would be permanently honored. The first golden age of Yankees baseball had been built on the shoulders of giants, Ruth and Gehrig primarily, but also players like Tony Lazzari and Bill Dickey and Red Ruffing, all contributing to a dynasty that dominated the 1930s. 5 championships in 8 years. A level of success that seemed almost unfair to the rest of baseball. A standard of excellence that would define what it meant to be a Yankee, what fans would expect from every team that followed, what would make the franchise synonymous with winning for generations to come. The Second World War interrupted everything, including baseball. From 1942 through 1945, as America fought overseas, major league rosters were depleted as players entered military service, as the game continued but in diminished form, as the nation's attention focused on matters far more serious than sports. The Yankees, like every team, sent many of their best players to war, washed their roster thin, and waited for peace to return so that baseball could resume in earnest. When the war ended in 1945, when soldiers began returning home and resuming their civilian lives, baseball embarked on a period of rebuilding and renewal. Players who had spent years in uniform serving their country came back to play the game they loved, and the sport entered a new era, one that would be defined by television's arrival, by integration following Jackie Robinson's debut in 1947, and by a post-war prosperity that brought fans to ballparks in record numbers. For the New York Yankees, the post-war years would mark their return to dominance, a period of success so complete and so sustained that it would surpass even the golden age of the 1930s. The late 1940s and early 1950s would see the Yankees win with a consistency that seemed almost inevitable, that made championship success not just expected but assumed, that created a dynasty unparalleled in baseball history. The run began in 1949 when the Yankees, under manager Casey Stengel, who had just been hired before the season, won the American League pennant and defeated the Brooklyn Dodgers in the World Series. It was Stengel's first season as Yankees manager, and immediately he delivered a championship, setting the tone for what would become the most successful managerial tenure in franchise history. The 1950 season brought another championship, with the Yankees again defeating the Philadelphia Phillies in the World Series, this time sweeping them in 4 games. 2 championships in 2 years under the new manager. The Yankees were back at the top of baseball, and they showed no signs of relinquishing that position. In 1951, they won again, the 3rd consecutive championship, defeating the Giants in the World Series in a series that went 6 games. The Yankees were establishing a pattern, a rhythm of success that seemed almost automatic. Season after season, they won their division, won the pennant, and won the World Series. It was becoming routine, expected, almost boring in its predictability for everyone except Yankees fans who never tired of celebrating championships. The 1952 season brought a 4th consecutive title, with the Yankees defeating the Dodgers in another hard-fought 7-game series. 4 straight championships now, matching a record that had been set by the Yankees themselves in 1936 to 1939. But this team wasn't done. They had one more championship in them, one more season of dominance that would extend the streak to unprecedented heights. In 1953, the Yankees won their 5th consecutive World Series, defeating the Dodgers yet again in a 6-game series. 5 straight championships. No team in baseball history had ever accomplished this before. No team has accomplished it since. The 1949 to 1953 Yankees stand alone in baseball history as the only team to win 5 consecutive World Series championships, a record that may never be broken. That represents a level of sustained excellence that seems almost impossible in a sport designed for competitive balance. Think about what that means for a moment. 5 straight years where the Yankees were the best team in baseball. 5 straight Octobers where they celebrated championships while every other team went home disappointed. 5 straight parades through the streets of New York. 5 straight championship rings distributed to players and staff. 5 straight seasons where being a Yankees fan meant watching your team achieve the ultimate goal. The consistency was staggering, the dominance complete. The roster that achieved this unprecedented success was loaded with talent, featuring players who would become Hall of Famers and Yankees legends. Joe DiMaggio was still there in the early part of this run, though aging and struggling with injuries, providing leadership and clutch performances before retiring after the 1951 season. Mickey Mantle arrived in 1951, a young phenom from Oklahoma with extraordinary speed and power, beginning what would become one of the greatest careers in baseball history. Phil Rizzuto provided slick defense and timely hitting from the shortstop position. Whitey Ford anchored the pitching staff with intelligence and precision. But perhaps no player from this era was more central to the Yankees' success, more emblematic of their championship culture, than the catcher who would become the face of the franchise for nearly 2 decades. Lawrence Peter Berra, everyone knew him as Yogi, made his Yankees debut in 1946, arriving as a young player whose awkward appearance and amusing malapropisms would make him famous beyond just his baseball abilities. Yogi looked like he shouldn't be an athlete, with a stocky build and a face that seemed more suited to a neighborhood grocer than a professional baseball player. And he had a way with words that created unintentional humor, phrases that became known as Yogiisms, and that would be quoted for generations. But on the baseball field, Yogi Berra was exceptional. Behind the plate, he called games with intelligence and managed pitchers with skill that earned their respect and trust. At the plate, He was dangerous despite an unorthodox approach that saw him swing at pitches well outside the strike zone and somehow drive them for hits. He could hit for average and for power, could drive in runs in crucial situations, could be counted on to produce when the team needed it most. And he won. Oh, how he won. Yogi Berra appeared in 14 World Series during his career, 14 trips to baseball's ultimate stage, 14 opportunities to compete for championships. To put that in perspective, most great players never appear in even one World Series. Many Hall of Famers played their entire careers without experiencing October baseball at all. But Yogi Berra appeared in 14 World Series, playing in a total of 75 World Series games over his career, both totals standing as records that may never be broken. Those 14 World Series appearances resulted in 10 championships. 10 times, Yogi Berra and the Yankees celebrated titles. 10 times he wore a championship ring on his fingers. The sheer volume of success is almost incomprehensible, the kind of achievement that seems to belong to a different era of sports when dominance was more possible, when one team could win with such consistency that it became routine. Berra's presence behind the plate during those championship years of the late 1940s and 1950s was crucial. He was the constant, the player who was always there, always performing, always contributing to championship success. Teammates came and went, managers changed, rosters evolved, but Yogi Berra remained, catching, hitting, winning. The Yankees' dominance continued beyond that 5-year championship streak. They won again in 1956. And this World Series would produce a moment so perfect, so unlikely, so memorable that it would become one of the most famous games in baseball history. Game 5 of the 1956 World Series, played on October 8th at Yankee Stadium, with the Yankees facing the Brooklyn Dodgers in a series that was tied at 2 games apiece. The starting pitcher for the Yankees that day was Don Larsen, a journeyman pitcher with a career that had been solid but not spectacular. A player who was good but not great, reliable but not exceptional. What happened that afternoon transcended anything Larsen had done before or would do again. He retired the first Dodgers batter, then the second, then the third. The 4th inning came and went without a base runner. The 5th inning passed the same way. By the 6th inning, the crowd at Yankee Stadium began to realize what might be happening, began to watch with increasing tension and hope as Larsen continued to set down every Dodgers hitter he faced. A perfect game, 27 batters faced, 27 batters retired, not a single base runner allowed, is one of the rarest achievements in baseball. In the regular season, it happens perhaps once every few years across all of baseball, a convergence of skill and luck and circumstance that requires everything to go right for 9 full innings. But in the World Series, with the pressure magnified, with the best hitters in baseball at the plate, with every pitch carrying enormous weight, a perfect game in the World Series had never happened. Not once in the history of baseball's championship series had any pitcher retired 27 consecutive batters without allowing anyone to reach base. The 9th inning arrived with Larsen's perfect game still intact. The crowd was on its feet, the tension almost unbearable. Yogi Berra crouched behind the plate, calling pitches, helping guide Larsen through the most important outs of his life. 1 out, 2 outs, and then the final batter, Dale Mitchell, pinch hitting for the Dodgers. Larsen worked the count, threw his pitches, and on a called strike 3, the perfect game was complete. Mitchell argued the call, certain the pitch was outside, but the umpire's arm had gone up, the strike had been called, and Don Larsen had achieved something no pitcher before or since has ever done in World Series play. Yogi Berra rushed to the mound and leaped into Larsen's arms, the image of that embrace becoming one of baseball's most iconic photographs. The perfect game stood alone in World Series history, a performance so unlikely that it seems almost fictional in the retelling. Over 60 years later, no pitcher has matched it. World Series perfect games remain a category with exactly 1 entry. Don Larsen, October 8, 1956, Yankee Stadium. The Yankees won that World Series, of course, defeating the Dodgers in 7 games. It was their 17th championship in franchise history, adding to a total that already dwarfed every other team in baseball. They would win again in 1958 and again in 1961 and 1962, the dominance continuing through the end of the 1950s and into the early 1960s, championship after championship piling up in a dynasty that seemed to have no end. The post-war years and mid-century dominance established the Yankees as more than just a successful franchise. They became synonymous with winning itself, with excellence, with championship tradition. 5 consecutive World Series titles from 1949 to 1953. Yogi Berra's 14 World Series appearances and 10 championships. Don Larsen's perfect game in the 1956 World Series. These weren't just achievements. They were the building blocks of a legacy, the creation of a standard that would define what it meant to be the Yankees, what fans would expect from every team that wore pinstripes. For fans of other teams, the Yankees' success during this era was frustrating, almost oppressive. Year after year, watching the Yankees win, watching them celebrate while your own team fell short, it created resentment and envy, made the Yankees the team everyone loved to hate, the symbol of dominance that seemed unfair in its consistency. But for Yankees fans, these were glory years, a time when championships were expected and delivered, when being a Yankees fan meant experiencing success on a scale that fans of other teams could only dream about. As sleep approaches, as thoughts drift toward rest, perhaps the image of that perfect game lingers. Don Larsen, pitching with precision and receiving every break, every call, every bounce that went the Yankees' way, retiring 27 consecutive Dodgers batters on the biggest stage baseball offers. Or perhaps it's Yogi Berra, that unlikely-looking catcher, appearing in his 8th or 10th or 14th World Series, doing what he always did, winning, performing, contributing to another Yankees championship. The post-war Yankees had taken the foundation built in earlier decades and expanded it, had won with such consistency that they seemed almost invincible, had created a dynasty that stood as the benchmark against which all other baseball success would be measured. As the 1950s progressed, as the Yankees continued their seemingly endless run of championships, a new star emerged who would come to define the franchise for a generation of fans. Mickey Mantle arrived in New York in 1951, a 19-year-old phenom from Commerce, Oklahoma, carrying expectations that would have crushed most young players. He was supposed to be the next great Yankees star, the player who would replace the aging Joe DiMaggio in center field and carry the franchise forward into a new era. Those were impossible shoes to fill, following a legend like DiMaggio, but somehow, against all odds and despite the enormous pressure, Mantle not only met those expectations but exceeded them. Mantle possessed a rare combination of physical abilities that made scouts and baseball people shake their heads in wonder. He could hit for power from both sides of the plate. He was a switch hitter who could drive the ball out of any ballpark, whether batting left-handed or right-handed. He had blazing speed, the kind of foot speed that let him beat out infield hits and turn singles into doubles, that made him a threat to steal bases and a terror on the base paths. He could play center field with grace and range, covering ground that other outfielders couldn't reach. In the early years of his career, before injuries began to accumulate and slow him down, Mantle might have been the most complete player in baseball, a 5-tool talent who could do everything the game required at an elite level. The injuries came early and often, though. Mantle's knees, particularly, betrayed him, suffering damage that would plague him throughout his career and ultimately prevent him from reaching the even greater heights he might have achieved if he'd stayed healthy. He played through pain constantly, wrapping his legs in bandages, receiving treatments before and after games, gutting out performances despite discomfort that would have kept lesser players on the bench. The what-ifs that surrounded Mantle's career. What if he'd stayed healthy? What if his knees hadn't deteriorated? What if he'd been able to play pain-free? Became part of his legend, creating the sense that even his magnificent achievements represented only a fraction of what he might have done. But even playing injured, even operating at less than full capacity, Mantle was spectacular. He won 3 Most Valuable Player awards in 1956, 1957, and 1962, recognition as the best player in the American League, the most valuable contributor to his team's success. He won the Triple Crown in 1956, leading the league in batting average, home runs, and runs batted in, an achievement that's become increasingly rare in modern baseball. He hit 536 home runs over his 18-year career, all spent with the Yankees, including tape measure blasts that traveled distances that seemed almost fictional, balls that left ballparks and landed in places where baseballs weren't supposed to go. Mantle became more than just a great player. He became an icon, a symbol of the Yankees and of baseball itself in the 1950s and early 1960s. His boyish good looks, his Oklahoma charm, his combination of power and grace on the field made him beloved by fans who saw in him something authentic and American, a kid from a small town who had made it to the biggest stage and become a superstar. The fact that he played in New York, in the media capital of the country, amplified his fame, made him a national figure in ways that playing in a smaller market never would have. With Mantle anchoring the lineup, with Yogi Berra behind the plate, with Whitey Ford on the mound, the Yankees continued their dominance of baseball. From 1955 through 1964, a span of 10 seasons, the Yankees reached the World Series 9 times. 9 World Series appearances in 10 years. It's a statistic so staggering that it's almost difficult to process. A level of consistency that seems to belong to a different sport, a different era, a time when competitive balance didn't exist, and one team could simply dominate year after year without serious challenge. They didn't win all 9 of those World Series. They won 4 of them, losing 5, which represented disappointment by Yankees standards, but would have been extraordinary success for any other franchise. But just reaching the World Series 9 times in 10 years, just being there consistently, year after year, representing the American League and competing for championships with such regularity, it reinforced the Yankees' status as baseball royalty, as the team that winning was synonymous with, as the franchise every other organization was chasing and failing to catch. The one year they didn't reach the World Series in that stretch was 1959, when they finished 3rd in the American League, their down year, still producing a respectable 79-75 record, but falling short of the championship expectations that had become standard. Yankees fans were disappointed and used to watching other teams play in October, but the drought lasted just one season. In 1960, they were back in the World Series, and in 1961, they would produce one of the most memorable seasons in baseball history. The 1961 Yankees might have been the greatest team the franchise ever fielded, a roster so loaded with talent, so balanced and deep, that they won 109 games and cruised to the American League pennant by 8 games. Mickey Mantle was in the lineup, of course, having another spectacular season. But the story that captivated the nation that summer involved another Yankees outfielder, a player who had come to New York in a trade 2 years earlier and who had been solid but not spectacular in his first seasons with the team. Roger Maris was quiet, almost sullen, uncomfortable with media attention and the spotlight that came with playing in New York. He was from North Dakota, a reserved man who just wanted to play baseball without the circus that surrounded the Yankees. But in 1961, Maris found himself in the midst of the biggest baseball story in America, chasing a record that had stood for 34 years, a record that many baseball fans considered sacred and untouchable. Babe Ruth's single-season home run record of 60, set in 1927, was one of baseball's most famous numbers, a total that seemed beyond reach, that had survived challenges from great sluggers over the decades, but had never been seriously threatened. But as the 1961 season progressed, as summer gave way to early fall, Roger Maris was threatening it. He was hitting home runs at a pace that suggested he might actually break Ruth's record, that he might hit 61 or more before the season ended. The chase became a national obsession. Newspapers covered it daily, tracking Maris's home run total, comparing his pace to Ruth's, speculating about whether he would actually break the record. Television cameras followed him constantly. Reporters surrounded his locker before and after every game, asking the same questions, creating pressure that Maris found almost unbearable. He wasn't built for this kind of attention, wasn't comfortable being the center of a media circus, and the stress manifested physically. His hair began falling out in patches, the tension literally making him ill. Making the situation more complicated was that Mickey Mantle was also chasing Ruth's record, also hitting home runs at a remarkable pace. For much of the summer, it appeared that both Yankees might break Ruth's record, that New York might produce 2 players surpassing 60 home runs in the same season. The media and many fans preferred this narrative, preferred Mantle as the potential record breaker because he was more charismatic, more comfortable in the spotlight, already beloved in ways that the dour Maris was not. But Mantle got hurt in September, an abscess on his hip limiting him and eventually ending his pursuit of the record at 54 home runs, an incredible total but short of Ruth's mark. Maris continued alone, the pressure building with each game, each at-bat, each home run that brought him closer to 61. Baseball's commissioner at the time, Ford Frick, made a controversial decision that would haunt Maris's achievement for decades. Frick announced that if Maris broke Ruth's record, it would only count as breaking the record if he did it within 154 games, the length of the season when Ruth set his record. The 1961 season was 162 games, 8 games longer than the 1927 season, and Frick declared that any record set in those additional games would carry an asterisk, would be considered somehow less legitimate than Ruth's mark. The decision was widely criticized as unfair to Maris, as an arbitrary attempt to protect Ruth's legacy rather than acknowledging that baseball had changed, that seasons were longer, that records naturally evolved as circumstances changed. But Frick held firm, and Maris knew that even if he broke the record, some people would dismiss it, would claim it didn't count, would insist that Ruth's 60 home runs in 154 games was more impressive than whatever Maris might achieve. Maris reached 60 home runs in the Yankees' 159th game, tying Ruth's record but missing Frick's arbitrary deadline for breaking it legitimately. 3 games remained in the season, 3 more chances to hit 1 more home run and claim the record outright, asterisk or not. The pressure was immense, the media's scrutiny overwhelming, the weight of expectations almost crushing. The final game of the regular season was on October 1, 1961, against the Boston Red Sox at Yankee Stadium. Maris came to bat in the 4th inning against pitcher Tracy Stallard. The count went to 2 balls and no strikes. Stallard threw another pitch, and Maris swung. The ball leaped off his bat, a line drive that climbed and kept climbing, sailing toward the right field stands. It cleared the fence, landing in the lower deck, and Roger Maris had done it. 61 home runs. The record was broken, Babe Ruth's 34-year-old mark surpassed by a quiet man from North Dakota who never wanted the attention the accomplishment brought. The asterisk controversy would persist for years, with baseball's record books listing Maris's achievement with a notation about the longer season, implicitly suggesting it was somehow less worthy than Ruth's record. Not until 1991, 5 years after Maris's death from cancer at age 51, did baseball finally remove the asterisk and recognize that 61 home runs in 1961 was the single-season record, full stop, no qualifications needed. The 1961 Yankees won the World Series, defeating the Cincinnati Reds in 5 games, adding another championship to their growing collection. Maris's record-breaking season had been achieved in service of team success, just as he would have wanted, without individual glory overshadowing the ultimate goal of winning championships. The following year, 1962, the Yankees won again, with Maris hitting 33 home runs and Mantle winning his 3rd MVP award, the 2 stars complementing each other and leading the team to another title. Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, and the Yankees of the late 1950s and early 1960s represented baseball at perhaps its peak of cultural prominence, before football began challenging it for national attention, before basketball became a major professional sport, when baseball was still unquestionably America's pastime, and the Yankees were unquestionably baseball's premier franchise. 9 World Series appearances in 10 years. A home run chase that captivated the nation. Stars like Mantle who transcended the sport to become cultural icons. It was an era of dominance and drama, of achievement and pressure, of a franchise operating at the absolute peak of success and visibility. The 1960s had ended with the Yankees still dominant, still winning, still the team everyone else was chasing. But as the calendar turned to the 1970s, something changed. The dynasty faltered, the winning stopped, and for the first time in over a decade, the Yankees found themselves mediocre, struggling, no longer the team that went to the World Series almost every year. The 1965 season had brought a pennant, but they lost the World Series to the Dodgers. And then, for 12 long years, the Yankees didn't return to the Fall Classic. 12 years of missing October baseball, of watching other teams compete for championships, of experiencing what fans of other teams had endured for decades: disappointment, frustration, and unfulfilled hope. The franchise that had defined winning was learning what losing felt like. The late 1960s and early 1970s brought mediocre teams, uninspiring rosters, seasons that ended early without playoff appearances. Mickey Mantle retired after the 1968 season, his body finally giving out after years of playing through pain, taking with him the last connection to the great teams of the 1950s and early 60s. The stars were gone, the magic had faded, and the Yankees were just another team, neither terrible nor good, just there, existing without the excellence that had defined them for so long. But in 1973, change arrived in the form of new ownership that would transform everything about the franchise, that would usher in an era of drama and spending and championship success that would make the Yankees relevant again, that would restore them to prominence in ways that were sometimes glorious and sometimes chaotic, but never boring. George Steinbrenner, a shipping magnate from Cleveland who had made his fortune in the Great Lakes shipping industry, purchased the Yankees for $10 million. $10 million. It seems almost quaint now, an absurdly small sum for a franchise that would eventually be valued in the billions. But in 1973, it was a significant investment, and Steinbrenner approached it with intensity and ambition that would come to define his ownership. He was not content to own a mediocre team, to accept the Yankees' current state as adequate. He wanted to win, wanted championships, wanted the Yankees to return to their former glory, and he was willing to spend money and make changes and create upheaval to achieve those goals. Steinbrenner's management style was hands-on to an extreme degree that was unusual for baseball owners. He involved himself in personnel decisions, questioned his managers constantly, changed his mind about strategies and approaches with dizzying frequency, and created an atmosphere of instability where managers and executives could never feel secure in their positions. He would fire managers, rehire them, fire them again. Billy Martin was hired and fired 5 times over the years, a revolving door that became almost comedic in its repetition. But Steinbrenner also spent money, real money. He pursued free agents aggressively once baseball's reserve clause was struck down and players gained the freedom to sign with whichever team offered the best contract. He paid premium salaries to attract the best players, outbidding other teams, using the Yankees' financial advantages to acquire talent that smaller market franchises couldn't afford. The approach was controversial, criticized by traditionalists who felt baseball should be about scouting and player development rather than simply buying championships. But Steinbrenner didn't care about criticism. He cared about winning. The investments began to pay off by the mid-1970s. The Yankees improved, adding talented players through trades and free agent signings, building a roster that could compete with the best teams in baseball. By 1976, they were contenders again, winning the American League East Division and advancing to the playoffs for the first time since 1964. The 12-year pennant drought was about to end, and it would end in dramatic fashion. The American League Championship Series in 1976 matched the Yankees against the Kansas City Royals in a best-of-5 series. The series went the full 5 games, coming down to a decisive Game 5 at Yankee Stadium on October 14th. The game was tied 6-6 in the bottom of the 9th inning, the tension almost unbearable, the crowd desperate for the Yankees to break through and return to the World Series after so many years away. Chris Chambliss, the Yankees' first baseman, led off the bottom of the 9th against Royals reliever Mark Little. The count went to 1 ball and 1 strike. Little threw his next pitch, and Chambliss swung. The ball soared toward right field, climbing higher, carrying deeper, headed toward the fence. It cleared the wall, a walk-off home run that won the pennant, that sent the Yankees to the World Series, that ended 12 years of disappointment in one glorious moment. The celebration that followed was chaotic, almost dangerous. Fans poured onto the field before Chambliss could complete his home run trot, surrounding the bases, making it nearly impossible for him to touch them all as he tried to navigate through the mob. He had to fight his way around the bases, dodging fans who wanted to celebrate with him, who wanted to touch the hero who had delivered the moment they'd been waiting for. The image of Chambliss trying to complete his home run trot through a sea of celebrating fans became iconic, representing the pent-up emotion of 12 years of frustration finally released in one explosive moment of joy. The Yankees lost the World Series that year to the Cincinnati Reds, who swept them in 4 games. But reaching the Fall Classic after such a long absence felt like success. felt like validation that the franchise was returning to form, that the investments and the changes in the Steinbrenner approach were working. The following year, 1977, would be even better. The Yankees signed Reggie Jackson as a free agent, bringing in one of baseball's biggest stars, a slugger with a massive ego and a flair for the dramatic who immediately created controversy by announcing that he was the straw that stirs the drink, implying that he was more important than the team's other stars, including team captain Thurman Munson. The quote created tension in the clubhouse, created resentment from teammates who felt Jackson was putting himself above the team, but it also reflected a certain truth. Jackson was a game changer, a player who could take over October baseball in ways few others could. The 1977 season was tumultuous, with manager Billy Martin and Reggie Jackson nearly coming to blows in the dugout during a nationally televised game, with Steinbrenner constantly interfering and creating drama, with the clubhouse fractured by egos and personalities that clashed. But somehow, through all the chaos, the Yankees won. They won the division, won the pennant, and advanced to the World Series against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Game 6 of the 1977 World Series, played on October 18th at Yankee Stadium with the Yankees leading the series 3-2, would produce one of the most dominant individual performances in baseball history. Reggie Jackson came to bat 5 times that night. He walked in his first at-bat, and then, in his next 3 at-bats, he hit 3 home runs. 3 consecutive swings, 3 consecutive home runs, each one leaving the ballpark, each one adding to the Yankees' lead, each one cementing Jackson's legend as a player who rose to the occasion when the stakes were highest. The 3rd home run was particularly majestic, a towering blast to dead center field that traveled an estimated 475 feet, one of the longest home runs ever hit at Yankee Stadium. Jackson trotted around the bases as the crowd chanted Reggie, Reggie, and his teammates waited at home plate to celebrate with the player who had delivered the championship despite all the controversy and tension that had surrounded him all season. The nickname was immediate and perfect, Mr. October. Reggie Jackson had earned it with that performance, with 3 home runs on 3 consecutive swings in the deciding game of the World Series. He had proven his own boast, had shown that he was indeed the straw that stirred the drink, that when October arrived and the pressure was greatest, he could deliver performances that transcended the normal bounds of the game. The Yankees won their first championship since 1962, ending a 15-year title drought that had seemed interminable to fans accustomed to winning. Steinbrenner had his championship just 4 years after purchasing the team, validation of his aggressive approach, proof that spending money and pursuing stars could produce the results he demanded. The 1978 season would be even more dramatic, even more improbable, even more representative of the chaos and excellence that characterized the Steinbrenner Yankees. The season started poorly, with the team struggling, falling behind the Boston Red Sox in the American League East Division. By July, the Yankees were 14 games behind Boston, seemingly out of contention, their chances of repeating as champions appearing dead. But the Yankees began to win. Game after game, they clawed back, reducing the deficit bit by bit while Boston stumbled. Steinbrenner had fired Billy Martin mid-season, again, replacing him with Bob Lemon, and under the new manager, the Yankees found their rhythm. By late September, they had erased the entire 14-game deficit, had caught Boston, and had forced a 1-game playoff to determine the division champion. The playoff game was held on October 2, 1978, at Fenway Park in Boston. The Red Sox led 2-0 going into the 7th inning, 5 outs away from eliminating the Yankees and advancing to the playoffs themselves. But then came a moment that Red Sox fans would relive in nightmares for decades, a moment that Yankees fans would celebrate as one of the most improbable and dramatic in franchise history. Bucky Dent, the Yankees shortstop, was not a power hitter. He had hit just 4 home runs all season, was known for his defense rather than his bat, was one of the least likely players on the roster to deliver a crucial home run. But with 2 runners on base and 2 outs in the 7th inning, Dent came to bat against Red Sox pitcher Mike Torres. The count went to 1 ball and 1 strike. Torres threw again, and Dent swung. The ball headed toward left field, not hit particularly hard, not traveling with the obvious authority of a home run. Red Sox left fielder Carl Yastrzemski went back to the wall, tracking the ball, and for a moment it seemed like it might be caught, might be just another fly out. But the ball kept carrying, kept floating, aided perhaps by the wind that swirled through Fenway Park that afternoon. It cleared the Green Monster, Boston's famous left field wall, landing in the netting for a 3-run home run that gave the Yankees a 3-2 lead. Fenway Park fell silent. 32,000 Red Sox fans stunned into disbelief. The Yankees would add more runs, would win the game 5-4, would advance to the playoffs and eventually to another World Series championship, their second consecutive title. And Bucky Dent, who had never hit a more important home run in his life and never would again, would forever be known by a nickname that Red Sox fans gave him. A nickname so profane that it couldn't be printed in family newspapers, but that expressed their anguish and fury at what he had done to their championship hopes. The Yankees won the World Series again in 1978, defeating the Dodgers in 6 games, becoming the first team since the 1961-62 Yankees to win consecutive championships. They had erased a 14-game deficit, won a playoff game on a home run by their weakest hitter, and claimed another title in the Steinbrenner era's early years. The chaos and the spending and the constant turmoil had produced championships, had restored the Yankees to their position atop baseball, had proven that Steinbrenner's methods, however unconventional and controversial, could work. But triumph was soon followed by tragedy. On August 2, 1979, Thurman Munson, the Yankees' captain and catcher, the heart and soul of the team, died in a plane crash while practicing takeoffs and landings near his home in Canton, Ohio. Munson was just 32 years old, still in his prime, still the leader his teammates looked to for guidance and inspiration. He had been with the Yankees since 1969, had caught for championship teams, had been named Rookie of the Year and MVP, had been the steady presence behind the plate through all the drama and chaos of the Steinbrenner era. The news of his death shocked the baseball world and devastated the Yankees organization. The team flew to Canton for the funeral, many of them serving as pallbearers, saying goodbye to a teammate and friend who had been taken far too soon. When they returned to play their next game at Yankee Stadium, the catcher's position was left empty for 1 inning, a tribute to Munson, before his backup took over the duties that would never be filled in quite the same way. The Yankees retired Munson's number 15, ensuring that no other Yankees player would ever wear it, that his place in franchise history would be permanently honored. A plaque was placed in Monument Park at Yankee Stadium, commemorating his career and his character, his achievements and his loss. The tragedy cast a shadow over the 1979 season and beyond, a reminder that sports, for all their importance to fans and players alike, ultimately exist within the context of real life, of mortality, of losses that transcend wins and championships. The Steinbrenner era had begun with ambition and spending, with dramatic moments like Chambliss's home run and Reggie Jackson's 3 home runs in Game 6, with improbable comebacks like the 1978 season and Bucky Dent's home run. It had brought championships back to the Yankees after a long drought, had restored the franchise to prominence, had created drama and controversy and excellence in almost equal measure. But it had also brought tragedy with Munson's death, a reminder that even dynasties and championships exist within the broader context of human experience, of joy and loss, of triumph and grief. The early years of the Steinbrenner era had delivered championships, had restored the Yankees to prominence with dramatic moments and star-studded rosters. But as the 1980s progressed, as the celebrations from those late 1970s titles faded into memory, the Yankees entered a period that would test the patience of their fans in ways that hadn't been experienced in decades. These would become known as the Wilderness Years, a time when the franchise that had defined winning struggled to even reach the playoffs, when the constant chaos that Steinbrenner created seemed to produce only turmoil rather than championships. The 1981 season offered one last gasp of glory before the drought began. The season was interrupted by a players' strike that split the year into 2 halves and created a complicated playoff format. But the Yankees navigated it successfully, reaching the World Series and defeating the Los Angeles Dodgers in 6 games. It was their 3rd championship in 6 years, another title to add to the franchise's collection, another validation of Steinbrenner's aggressive approach to building a winner. But that 1981 championship would be the last for a very long time. What followed was a period of frustration that stretched on for year after disappointing year, a drought that would last well over a decade, and that would see the Yankees become also-rans, teams that finished with mediocre records and watched the playoffs from home while other franchises celebrated October baseball. From 1982 through 1994, 13 consecutive seasons, the Yankees failed to reach the postseason. 13 years without playoff baseball in the Bronx. For a franchise accustomed to appearing in the World Series almost every year, for fans who had watched their team dominate baseball for decades, this extended absence from October was almost unbearable. Other teams made the playoffs, other teams competed for championships, while the Yankees finished third or fourth in their division, playing out meaningless late-season games before empty seats at Yankee Stadium. The reasons for this prolonged mediocrity were complex, but at the center of the dysfunction was George Steinbrenner himself. His hands-on management style, his constant interference, his demands for immediate results, and his unwillingness to allow his baseball people to execute long-term plans. All of it created an environment where sustained success was nearly impossible. Managers were hired and fired with stunning regularity, creating instability that made it difficult to establish consistent systems or player development philosophies. Billy Martin became the symbol of this chaos. Martin was a volatile personality, a former Yankees player who understood the franchise's traditions but who also drank heavily, got into fights, and created drama wherever he went. Steinbrenner hired him as manager, fired him when things went poorly or when Martin's behavior became too problematic, then hired him again when the next manager didn't work out. Over the course of the 1980s, Martin was hired and fired 5 separate times, a revolving door that became almost farcical in its repetition. The first time, Martin managed from 1975 to 1978, leading the team to those World Series championships before being fired after making disparaging comments about Steinbrenner and Reggie Jackson. The second time came in 1979, lasting just 1 season before he was fired again. The third stint came in 1983, again lasting just 1 year. The fourth time was in 1985, and again it ended after 1 season. The fifth and final time came in 1988, and this time Martin lasted until June before being fired yet again. Each firing and rehiring was accompanied by drama, by press conferences, by Steinbrenner making pronouncements about the direction of the team, by Martin either apologizing for his behavior or defiantly defending himself. The media ate it up, covering every twist and turn, dubbing the Yankees the Bronx Zoo for the circus-like atmosphere that surrounded the franchise. But while the drama provided entertainment for neutral observers and headlines for newspapers, it was destructive to the organization's ability to build a consistent winner. Players came and went, acquired in flashy trades or expensive free agent signings, then discarded when they didn't immediately produce championships. There was no patience for development, no tolerance for the natural ups and downs that even good teams experience. Steinbrenner wanted to win now, wanted results immediately, and his impatience led to decisions that mortgaged the future for modest gains in the present, that left the farm system depleted and the major league roster constantly churning with new faces who never had time to gel into a cohesive unit. The contrast with other successful franchises was stark. Teams like the Oakland Athletics and the Toronto Blue Jays built through player development, drafted well, developed their prospects, and competed for championships with homegrown talent supplemented by smart veteran acquisitions. The Yankees, meanwhile, tried to buy their way to success, signing expensive free agents who often underperformed or got injured, trading away prospects for veterans who provided short-term help but no sustained excellence. Through all of this turmoil, through all the managerial changes and the roster upheaval and the media circus, there was one constant, one player who represented everything good about Yankees tradition even as the organization around him descended into chaos. Don Mattingly arrived in the majors in 1982, a left-handed hitting first baseman with a sweet swing and a work ethic that reminded older fans of Lou Gehrig, another first baseman who had given the Yankees everything he had every single day. Mattingly wasn't flashy or controversial. He didn't create headlines with dramatic statements or off-field behavior. He simply played baseball at an exceptionally high level, day after day, year after year, providing the Yankees with excellence even when little else about the organization was excellent. He hit for average and for power, drove in runs consistently, played first base with grace and reliability, and carried himself with a professionalism that made him beloved by teammates and fans alike. In 1985, Mattingly had perhaps the greatest season of his career, hitting .324 with 35 home runs and 145 runs batted in, leading the American League in RBIs and earning the Most Valuable Player award. At just 24 years old, he was already one of the best players in baseball, the face of the franchise, the player who gave Yankees fans hope that even if the team wasn't winning championships, they at least had someone special to watch and support. But the MVP season didn't lead to playoff success. The Yankees finished second in their division, 6 games behind the Toronto Blue Jays, missing the postseason again. Mattingly would continue to produce at a high level for several more seasons. He hit .352 in 1986, won 9 Gold Gloves for defensive excellence, was selected to 6 All-Star teams, but the playoffs remained out of reach. Year after year, he played excellent baseball for mediocre teams, never getting the chance to showcase his abilities on October's biggest stage. The cruel irony of Mattingly's career was timing. He arrived just after the Yankees' championship run ended, establishing himself as a star during the franchise's worst years. His prime years, the seasons when he was at his absolute best, were wasted on teams that couldn't compete for titles. By the time the Yankees finally became good again in the mid-1990s, by the time they started winning division titles and reaching the playoffs, Mattingly's back had given out. Injuries had diminished his abilities, and he was near the end of his career. In 1995, the Yankees finally returned to the postseason after the long drought, reaching the playoffs as a wild-card team. Mattingly, in what would be his final season, finally got to play October baseball. He was 34 years old, no longer the MVP-caliber player he had been a decade earlier, but still a leader, still the heart of the team. The Yankees lost to the Seattle Mariners in a dramatic 5-game division series, with Mattingly going 10-4, 24 with a home run in what would be his only postseason appearance. After that loss, Mattingly retired. He had played 14 seasons, all with the Yankees, had accumulated impressive statistics, and had been one of the best players of his generation. But he never reached the World Series, never won a championship, never got to experience what so many lesser players had experienced simply because they played for the Yankees during better times. It was a testament to how much the franchise had fallen that even a player as excellent as Mattingly could spend an entire career with the team and never compete for a championship during his prime. The wilderness years were marked by this kind of frustration, watching great individual performances that didn't translate to team success, enduring constant organizational chaos that prevented the building of sustainable excellence, seeing other franchises celebrate championships while the Yankees remained stuck in mediocrity. The Bronx Zoo reputation became firmly established during these years, with the Yankees known as much for drama and dysfunction as for baseball excellence. Steinbrenner's constant meddling, his inability to let his baseball people do their jobs without interference, his pattern of hiring and firing managers in rapid succession, all of it contributed to a culture that was toxic for sustained success. Good players were reluctant to sign with the Yankees because they knew they'd be playing in a pressure cooker, knew that Steinbrenner would criticize them publicly if they struggled, knew that job security didn't exist in an organization where even successful managers were fired on a whim. The farm system, once a strength of the organization, withered from neglect. The Yankees traded away prospects for veteran players who provided short-term help but no long-term solution. They failed to develop homegrown talent the way they had in earlier eras, when players like Mickey Mantle and Yogi Berra came up through the system and became franchise cornerstones. The cupboard was bare, the pipeline empty, and the only way to improve was through expensive free agent signings that often didn't work out as planned. For Yankees fans who had lived through the glory years, who remembered when their team went to the World Series almost every year, the wilderness years were a painful reminder that success isn't guaranteed, that even the greatest franchises can fall into extended periods of mediocrity, that the Yankees were not immune to the struggles that other teams faced. The 13 years without a playoff appearance felt interminable, each season beginning with hope and ending with the same disappointing reality. The Yankees were good enough to avoid being terrible, but not good enough to compete for championships. But even in these dark years, even as the team struggled, and the organization descended into chaos, the foundation was being laid for what would come next. Young players were being developed in the minor leagues who would eventually form the core of championship teams. Front office personnel were learning lessons about what worked and what didn't, about how to build sustainable success rather than chasing short-term fixes. And circumstances would eventually align to create the opportunity for transformation, for a return to the kind of excellence that had defined the franchise through most of its history. The early 1990s still felt like the wilderness, like the Yankees were trapped in a cycle of mediocrity from which escape seemed impossible. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Something was being built that would transform the franchise and launch a new dynasty to rival the great Yankees teams of the past. The chaos was beginning to give way to structure. The short-term thinking was being replaced by long-term planning, and the farm system that had been neglected for so long was finally producing the kind of talent that could form the foundation of championship teams. The 1994 season began with renewed hope, with a roster that seemed more balanced and talented than the Yankees had fielded in years. And as the summer progressed, that hope seemed justified. The Yankees were winning, playing excellent baseball, competing at the top of the American League East Division. By August, they had the best record in the American League, were on pace to reach the playoffs for the first time since 1981, were giving their fans reason to believe that the long drought might finally be ending. And then the strike came. On August 12, 1994, the players walked out over labor disputes with team owners, particularly over the issue of a salary cap that owners wanted to implement and players refused to accept. The game stopped, the season suspended, and everyone waited for negotiations to resolve the impasse so baseball could resume. But the negotiations dragged on, positions hardened, and eventually the unthinkable happened. The remainder of the season was canceled. There would be no playoffs in 1994. There would be no World Series for the first time since 1904. For Yankees fans, the timing was cruel. Their team had been the best in the American League, had been positioned to end the playoff drought, and now they would never know what might have been. The season simply ended, unfinished, the Yankees' excellent record rendered meaningless by the strike. The frustration was almost unbearable, to come so close after waiting so long, only to have it taken away by labor disputes that fans had no control over and little interest in. The strike continued into 1995, with spring training canceled and the season delayed. When baseball finally resumed in late April, using replacement players briefly before the strike was settled, the Yankees picked up where they had left off the previous season. They were good, competitive, playing winning baseball. But they weren't quite good enough to win their division, finishing 7 games behind the Boston Red Sox in the AL East. However, baseball had recently instituted a wild card playoff spot, a team with the best record among non-division winners that would also make the postseason. The Yankees qualified as the wild card, earning a playoff berth for the first time since 1981, finally ending the 14-year drought that had defined the wilderness years. The long wait was over. The Yankees were back in October baseball. The playoff appearance ended in disappointment, with the Yankees losing to the Seattle Mariners in a dramatic 5-game division series that included Don Mattingly's final games. But simply being there, simply experiencing playoff baseball again after such a long absence, felt like progress. The Yankees were heading in the right direction, building something that looked sustainable rather than chasing quick fixes that never worked out. The reason for this optimism, the foundation upon which the coming dynasty would be built, was a renewed focus on player development and the farm system. After years of trading away prospects and relying on expensive free agents, the Yankees had finally begun investing in scouting and development, identifying young talent and nurturing it through the minor leagues rather than simply buying established stars from other teams. The results of this approach were beginning to show at the major league level. For young players, in particular, would form the core of what was coming. Players who had been drafted and developed by the Yankees organization, who would spend their entire careers in pinstripes, who would become the faces of a new dynasty. Derek Jeter was a shortstop from Michigan, drafted in 1992 and developed through the Yankees system, making his major league debut in 1995 at age 20. He was smooth and athletic, with range at shortstop and a swing that produced line drives to all fields. But beyond the physical tools, Jeter had something intangible, a presence, a confidence, a knack for making plays in crucial moments that would define his career and make him the face of the franchise for 2 decades. Mariano Rivera was a relief pitcher from Panama who had been signed as an amateur free agent in 1990 and had worked his way through the system, initially as a starting pitcher before being moved to the bullpen where his talents would be maximized. He threw one pitch primarily, a cut fastball that moved sharply and late, that batters knew was coming but still couldn't hit consistently. He was calm under pressure, almost serene on the mound even in the most intense situations, and he would become the greatest relief pitcher in baseball history. Bernie Williams was a center fielder from Puerto Rico, signed in 1985 and developed patiently through the organization, making his major league debut in 1991. He was a switch hitter with power from both sides of the plate, a graceful defender in center field with excellent range, and a musician who played classical guitar with genuine skill. Williams was quiet, almost shy, but on the field he was a star, the kind of complete player who could beat you with his bat, his glove, or his legs. Jorge Posada was a catcher from Puerto Rico, drafted in 1990 and developed through the system, reaching the majors in 1995. He was a switch hitter who would eventually become one of the most productive hitting catchers in baseball, combining power and plate discipline in ways that made him dangerous from both sides of the plate. Behind the plate, he was tough and competitive, managing pitchers effectively and providing leadership that would be crucial to the team's success. These four players, Jeter, Rivera, Williams, and Posada, would become known as the Core Four, the homegrown foundation of the Yankees dynasty that was about to begin. They would play together for over a decade, would win multiple championships together, would become beloved figures to Yankees fans and respected throughout baseball as representatives of how to build sustainable success. The 1996 season was when everything came together. The Yankees, now managed by Joe Torre, who had been hired before the season, won the American League East with a record of 92-70. They advanced through the playoffs, defeating the Texas Rangers in the Division Series and the Baltimore Orioles in the Championship Series, reaching the World Series for the first time since 1981. Their World Series opponent was the Atlanta Braves, who were favored to win, who had one of the best pitching staffs in baseball, who seemed to have every advantage. The Braves won the first 2 games in New York, taking a commanding 2-0 series lead and appearing poised to close out the championship quickly. But the Yankees refused to fold. They won Game 3 in Atlanta. They won Game 4. They won Game 5 to take the series lead. And in Game 6, back in New York, they completed the comeback, winning the game and the championship, celebrating on their home field as World Series champions for the first time in 18 years. The celebration was enormous, cathartic, a release of 18 years of frustration and disappointment. Yankees fans flooded the streets, waving their caps and screaming with joy, embracing strangers, celebrating a championship that had seemed impossible just months earlier when the team was down 0-2 in the World Series. The wilderness years were over. The dynasty had begun. The 1998 season would produce perhaps the greatest Yankees team ever assembled, a roster so balanced and talented, so relentless in its excellence, that it won 114 games during the regular season and then swept through the playoffs with an 11-2 record, defeating the San Diego Padres in the World Series in 4 games. The 1998 Yankees were dominant in ways that few teams have ever been, combining excellent pitching, solid defense, and timely hitting into a machine that simply ground down opponents week after week. In 1999, they won again, defeating the Atlanta Braves in the World Series, their 3rd championship in 4 years. The Core Four were all contributing. Jeter winning championships and making all-star teams, Rivera converting save opportunities with almost automatic efficiency, Williams hitting home runs and patrolling center field, Posada catching and hitting in the heart of the order. The dynasty was in full bloom. And then came 2000, a season that would produce one of the most memorable World Series in Yankees history. The New York Mets, the Yankees' crosstown rivals who played in the National League, won their pennant and advanced to the World Series, setting up a Subway Series, the first championship matchup between the 2 New York teams since 1956. The city was divided, Yankees fans and Mets fans arguing and predicting and celebrating the opportunity to settle the question of which New York team was superior. The Yankees won Game 1 at home, a 12-inning thriller that set the tone for the series. They won Game 2, also at home, taking a commanding 2-0 lead. The series moved to Shea Stadium, the Mets' home, and the Yankees won Game 3. They won Game 4, completing the sweep, defeating their crosstown rivals, and claiming their fourth championship in 5 years, their third consecutive title. The Subway Series sweep was sweet for Yankees fans, vindication of their belief that their team was superior to the Mets, that the Yankees were New York's true team. For championships in 5 years, the core four winning together, developing into the leaders of a dynasty. Derek Jeter making plays at shortstop and delivering clutch hits, earning the nickname Captain Clutch for his ability to perform in big moments. Mariano Rivera jogging in from the bullpen in the 9th inning of close games, converting save after save with that cut fastball that seemed impossible to hit. Bernie Williams patrolling center field and hitting home runs in October. Jorge Posada catching every inning, managing pitchers, contributing offensively. The dynasty of 1996 to 2000 restored the Yankees to their rightful place atop baseball, reminded the world that this franchise was special, that when built properly and managed well, the Yankees were capable of sustained excellence that few organizations could match. The core four became the foundation, the homegrown talent that Steinbrenner's earlier teams had lacked, the stability that allowed the franchise to supplement with free agents and trades rather than relying on them exclusively. The success also validated the approach of developing talent rather than simply buying it, of having patience with young players rather than discarding them at the first sign of struggle, of building organizational depth that could sustain success through injuries and the inevitable departures of veteran players. The Yankees had learned from the wilderness years, had adapted their approach, and had created a dynasty that rivaled the great teams of the franchise's storied past. As the new millennium began, as the Yankees celebrated their fourth championship in 5 years, the franchise stood at the pinnacle of baseball. The dynasty was established, the core four was entering their prime, and the expectation was that championships would continue to arrive with regularity. That October success was simply what the Yankees did. And while the team wouldn't win quite as frequently as they had in the late 1990s, they would create October moments that would become part of baseball lore, plays and games that would be remembered and discussed for decades, performances that added to the rich tapestry of Yankees' postseason history. The 2001 season was marked by tragedy that extended far beyond baseball. On September 11th, terrorists attacked New York City, destroying the World Trade Center and killing thousands of people in an act that shook the nation to its core. Baseball stopped for a week, the games seeming trivial in the face of such horror, before resuming as the country tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. The Yankees, representing New York, playing in a city that was grieving and traumatized, took on significance beyond just sports. They became a symbol of resilience, of the city's determination to continue, to not be defeated by terror. The team responded by winning their division and advancing to the playoffs, where they would face the Oakland Athletics in the division series. Game 3 of that series, played on October 13th at the Oakland Coliseum, produced a moment so unlikely, so perfectly executed, that it would become one of the most famous defensive plays in postseason history. The Yankees were leading 1-0 in the 7th inning, protecting a slim advantage, trying to hold on and take a commanding 2-1 series lead. Oakland had a runner on first base, Jeremy Giambi, when Terrence Long hit a ball into the right field corner. Shane Spencer, the Yankees right fielder, chased it down and threw toward home plate, trying to get Giambi, who was running hard from first base and would surely score to tie the game. But Spencer's throw was offline, sailing up the first base line well away from home plate, seemingly guaranteeing that Giambi would score easily. The play appeared over, the tying run about to cross the plate, momentum swinging to Oakland. Except that Derek Jeter, the Yankees shortstop, had read the play perfectly. He had recognized that Spencer's throw might be off target, had positioned himself between first base and home plate in case he was needed, and when the throw sailed past the cutoff man, Jeter was there. He caught the ball on one hop, his momentum carrying him toward the first base line, away from home plate. In one motion, without breaking stride, Jeter flipped the ball backhanded to catcher Jorge Posada, who was waiting at home plate. The flip was perfect, arriving at exactly the right moment, at exactly the right height. Posada caught it, and swept the tag down on Giambi's leg just before he reached home plate. Out. The run didn't score. The Yankees' lead remained intact. The play was so unexpected, so improvised, that it took a moment for everyone watching to process what had happened. Replays showed Jeter's positioning, showed him reading the play in real time, showed the backhanded flip arriving perfectly for Posada's tag. It was defensive brilliance, baseball instincts operating at the highest level, a player being exactly where he needed to be and making exactly the play that was required. The flip play, as it immediately became known, preserved the Yankees' 1-0 victory and helped them advance past Oakland. They would reach the World Series, ultimately losing to the Arizona Diamondbacks in 7 games in a series that produced its own dramatic moments. But the flip play remained as one of Jeter's signature moments, proof of his baseball intelligence and his knack for being in the right place at crucial times. The 2003 season brought another playoff run, another opportunity for October glory. The Yankees advanced to the American League Championship Series where they faced their most bitter rival, the Boston Red Sox, in a matchup that had all the intensity and animosity that had built up over decades of competition between these two franchises. The series went back and forth, both teams winning crucial games, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. By Game 7, with everything on the line, the series had lived up to all the hype and anticipation. The winner would go to the World Series. The loser would go home with the devastating knowledge that they had been so close, but had fallen short. The game was tied 5-5 after 9 innings, the tension almost unbearable, the crowd at Yankee Stadium on its feet for every pitch. The game moved into extra innings, both teams fighting for the run that would end it, that would send them to the World Series. The 10th inning passed without a score. The 11th inning came, and Yankees manager Joe Torre sent Aaron Boone to pinch hit. Boone was a veteran infielder who had been acquired in a mid-season trade, a solid player but not a star, someone who provided depth and experience but wasn't expected to be a hero. He stepped to the plate in the bottom of the 11th inning to face Red Sox pitcher Tim Wakefield, a knuckleballer whose unpredictable pitches had baffled hitters throughout his career. The first pitch was a knuckleball that didn't knuckle much, that came in flatter and more hittable than Wakefield intended. Boone swung and connected, the ball leaping off his bat and heading toward left field. It climbed higher, carried deeper, and cleared the fence for a walk-off home run that sent the Yankees to the World Series and sent Red Sox players and fans into the depths of despair. The celebration at Yankee Stadium was jubilant, players mobbing Boone at home plate, fans screaming themselves hoarse, the joy of defeating Boston in such dramatic fashion adding extra sweetness to the victory. For Red Sox fans, it was another chapter in their tortured history, another heartbreaking loss to the Yankees, another October disappointment that reinforced their belief that they were cursed, that they would never beat the Yankees when it mattered most. The Yankees would lose the 2003 World Series to the Florida Marlins, but Boone's home run remained the defining moment of that postseason, an image of him rounding the bases with his arms raised in triumph, celebrating a moment that Yankees fans would cherish and Red Sox fans would never forget. The following year, 2004, brought another Yankees-Red Sox ALCS matchup, another chance for these rivals to battle for the pennant. The Yankees appeared to be in complete control of the series, winning the first 3 games and standing just one victory away from sweeping Boston and returning to the World Series. No team in baseball history had ever come back from a 3-0 deficit in a playoff series. The Yankees seemed destined to close it out, to advance, to consign the Red Sox to another painful October defeat. Game 4 went to extra innings tied 4-4, the Red Sox fighting to extend their season, the Yankees trying to deliver the knockout blow. The game stretched to 12 innings, both teams exhausted, both pitching staffs depleted. Finally, in the 12th inning, Red Sox first baseman Kevin Miller drew a walk, and pinch runner Dave Roberts stole second base, putting the tying run in scoring position. Bill Mueller singled him home, and the Red Sox had won, extending the series to Game 5. Game 5 went 14 innings, nearly 6 hours of baseball that tested the endurance of everyone involved. The Yankees led multiple times, had chances to close it out, but couldn't deliver the final blow. The Red Sox kept fighting back, kept finding ways to tie the game, kept refusing to accept elimination. Finally, in the 14th inning, David Ortiz hit a walk-off single that won the game for Boston and sent the series back to New York with the Yankees' lead cut to 3-2. Game 6 in New York saw the Red Sox build a lead and hold on, forcing a decisive Game 7. And in that Game 7, everything fell apart for the Yankees. Boston scored early and often, building a lead that the Yankees couldn't overcome. The final score was 10-3, a humiliating defeat that completed the historic collapse. The Red Sox had done what no team had ever done before. They had come back from a 3-0 series deficit to win 4 straight games and claim the pennant. For Yankees fans, the 2004 ALCS collapse was devastating, perhaps the most painful loss in franchise history. To be so close to the World Series, to lead 3-0 in the series, to have multiple chances to close it out, and then to watch it all slip away as the Red Sox mounted the greatest comeback in playoff history. It was almost too much to bear. The memories of Aaron Boone's home run from the previous year were tainted by this new reality. The rivalry had shifted, momentum had changed, and the Yankees had suffered a loss that would haunt them and their fans for years. The Red Sox would go on to win the World Series, breaking their own 86-year championship drought, and for years afterward, Red Sox fans would remind Yankees fans of 2004, of the collapse, of the historic comeback that had turned the rivalry on its head. For a franchise accustomed to October glory, to clutch performances and championship celebrations, the 2004 collapse served as a painful reminder that even the Yankees were vulnerable, that even with all their history and tradition and talent, they could fail in spectacular fashion when it mattered most. These October moments, the flip play, Boone's home run, the 2004 collapse, became part of Yankees lore, stories that would be told and retold, plays that would be replayed endlessly, games that would be remembered decades later. Some brought joy and validation, proof that the Yankees could still create magic in October, that their players could make the plays and deliver the hits when everything was on the line. Others brought heartbreak and humiliation, reminders that baseball is unpredictable, that leads can evaporate, that even the best teams sometimes fail. For Derek Jeter, these moments reinforced his reputation as a player who rose to the occasion in October, who made plays that others wouldn't have made, who seemed to have a sixth sense for when he was needed most. The flip play was pure Jeter, being in the right place, making the perfect play, delivering under pressure. His entire career would be marked by these October moments, by clutch hits and defensive gems that came when the stakes were highest. Perhaps the image that lingers is Jeter, sprinting across the diamond to position himself for that flip, making the backhanded toss that saved a run and preserved a victory. Or perhaps it's Aaron Boone, rounding the bases after his home run, arms raised in triumph, celebrating a moment that would define his career. Or perhaps it's the painful memory of 2004, of watching a 3-0 lead evaporate, of experiencing the kind of defeat that even the greatest franchises sometimes endure. These October moments, joyful and painful alike, are what make baseball memorable, what create the stories that fans carry with them, what turn games into legends and players into icons. The Yankees had provided plenty of both, and October baseball in the Bronx would never be quite the same. As the sting of the 2004 collapse faded into the background, as the years passed and the core four aged, the Yankees found themselves in transition, caught between the dynasty of the late 1990s and early 2000s and whatever would come next. The franchise was still competitive, still reaching the playoffs most years, but championships had become elusive. After winning in 2000, the Yankees had gone nearly a decade without a World Series title, a drought that would have been acceptable for most franchises but felt interminable for the Yankees and their fans who measured success only in championships. In 2007, the Yankees made a move that would reshape the franchise and generate headlines around the baseball world. They signed Alex Rodriguez to a new contract worth $275 million over 10 years, the largest contract in baseball history, a deal so massive that it dwarfed every other player contract that had come before it. Rodriguez, known universally as A-Rod, was one of the best players in baseball, a shortstop-turned-third baseman with prodigious power and exceptional all-around skills who seemed destined for the Hall of Fame. But A-Rod was also controversial, carrying baggage that made him a polarizing figure. He had admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs during his time with the Texas Rangers, tarnishing his accomplishments and raising questions about the legitimacy of his statistics. He was seen by many as selfish, more concerned with personal achievements than team success, a player who put up impressive numbers but hadn't won championships. And he had a complicated relationship with Derek Jeter, his Yankees teammate and the face of the franchise, a tension between two stars that created uncomfortable dynamics in the clubhouse. The $275 million contract was vintage Steinbrenner-era Yankees, going after the biggest star available, outbidding everyone else, using the franchise's financial advantages to acquire talent that smaller market teams couldn't afford. Critics argued that the Yankees were trying to buy championships again, that they were using money as a substitute for smart baseball decisions. But Steinbrenner and the Yankees organization believed that Rodriguez, despite the controversies, was worth the investment, that he could help deliver the championship that had eluded them since 2000. The pressure on Rodriguez to perform in October, to finally win a championship and silence his critics, was enormous. He had been excellent in regular seasons throughout his career, putting up MVP-caliber numbers year after year. But in the postseason, he had struggled, his batting average dropping, his power disappearing, his performance in clutch situations falling far short of what was expected from a player of his caliber. The reputation as a playoff choker followed him, and every October failure reinforced the narrative that A-Rod couldn't deliver when it mattered most. But 2009 would be different. The Yankees, playing in their brand-new stadium that had opened that spring, put together a roster designed to win now, supplementing the aging core four with veterans and talented role players. Rodriguez had one of the best seasons of his career, hitting 30 home runs and driving in 100 runs despite missing time with injuries. And when October arrived, when the pressure was at its highest, Rodriguez finally delivered the performances that had eluded him for so long. In the division series against the Minnesota Twins, Rodriguez hit .455 with a home run. In the championship series against the Los Angeles Angels, he was even better, driving in 6 runs and providing the offense that carried the Yankees to the World Series. And in the World Series against the Philadelphia Phillies, Rodriguez continued to hit, continued to drive in crucial runs, continued to be the player the Yankees had paid $275 million to be. The Yankees won the 2009 World Series in 6 games, defeating the defending champion Phillies and claiming the franchise's 27th championship. For Rodriguez, the title was validation, proof that he could perform in October, that he could contribute to championship success, that he was more than just a player who accumulated statistics in meaningless games. The monkey was off his back, the criticism silenced, at least temporarily, by the reality of a championship ring on his finger. The 2009 championship was particularly meaningful because it marked the end of an era and the beginning of a transition. This would be the last championship for the core four, the final time that Jeter, Rivera, Posada, and Petit would celebrate a World Series title together. They had won 4 championships in the late 1990s, had remained competitive through the 2000s, and had delivered one more title before age and time caught up with them. Mariano Rivera, the greatest relief pitcher in baseball history, continued to dominate through the end of his career. His cut fastball remained unhittable, his composure in high-pressure situations remained unshakable, and he continued to convert save opportunities with efficiency that seemed almost automatic. When he finally retired after the 2013 season, he left the game as the all-time saves leader with 652 regular season saves, a total that may never be broken, that stands as a monument to consistency and excellence across 2 decades. But Rivera's postseason statistics were even more remarkable. In 96 playoff appearances spanning 19 years, he posted an earned run average of 0.70. 0.70. In 141 innings of October baseball, facing the best hitters in the world in the highest pressure situations imaginable, Rivera was essentially unhittable. He converted 42 saves in 47 opportunities in the playoffs, a success rate that defied logic, that seemed to belong to a video game rather than real baseball. The signature moment of Rivera's dominance came in save situations, when he would jog in from the bullpen in the 9th inning with the Yankees protecting a 1 or 2 run lead, with the crowd on its feet, with Enter Sandman by Metallica playing over the stadium speakers announcing his arrival. The song became synonymous with Rivera, with that slow jog from the bullpen to the mound, with the calm confidence he carried that made you believe the game was over even though 3 outs still needed to be recorded. Rivera threw that cut fastball, that one pitch that moved late and sharp, that broke bats and induced weak contact, that batters knew was coming but still couldn't hit consistently. He didn't need multiple pitches or elaborate deception. He had one pitch, everyone knew it was coming, and it didn't matter. He threw it for strikes, threw it on the black, threw it with precision that made it impossible to square up. Hitters would swing and miss, or make weak contact that resulted in easy outs, and Rivera would calmly record 3 outs and walk off the mound. Another save secured, another game won. When Rivera retired, he became the first player ever unanimously elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, receiving votes on all 425 ballots cast by the Baseball Writers Association of America. The unanimous election was recognition not just of his statistics, which were unprecedented, but of his character, his professionalism, his consistency across 2 decades. Rivera never complained, never created controversy, never demanded attention. He simply did his job at a level of excellence that had never been seen before and will likely never be matched. The 2009 season was also notable for the opening of the new Yankee Stadium, a massive construction project that had replaced the original stadium that had stood since 1923. The old stadium had been renovated in the mid-1970s, but was showing its age by the 2000s, and the Yankees decided that rather than renovating again, they would build an entirely new ballpark across the street from the original location. The new stadium cost $1.5 billion to construct, making it one of the most expensive sports venues ever built. The price tag reflected the Yankees' commitment to creating a facility that would provide modern amenities while honoring the franchise's history and tradition. The exterior design echoed the original stadium's facade, creating visual continuity with the past. Inside, there were luxury suites and club seating that generated enormous revenue, restaurants and lounges that provided premium experiences for fans willing to pay for them, and a museum celebrating Yankees history with artifacts and exhibits. Monument Park was recreated in the new stadium, the area beyond the center field wall where plaques and monuments honor Yankees legends from Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig through Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera. Fans could visit before games, walking among the monuments, reading the inscriptions, connecting with the franchise's rich history. The dimensions of the field were designed to match the original stadium's layout as closely as possible, maintaining the character and feel that had made Yankee Stadium one of baseball's most iconic venues. The opening of the new stadium in 2009 was bittersweet for some longtime fans who had memories attached to the old ballpark, who had watched games there for decades, who felt that something irreplaceable was being lost even as something impressive was being built. But the new stadium quickly established itself as a worthy successor, hosting that 2009 championship season in its first year, creating new memories while honoring the old ones. The 2009 World Series championship would be the Yankees' last to date, the most recent in a legacy of championships that stretches back to 1923. In the years since, the team has remained competitive, has made the playoffs regularly, has fielded talented rosters, and provided exciting moments. But the ultimate prize, the World Series championship, has remained elusive, creating a drought that by Yankees standards feels long even though by any other measure, 15 years between titles would be considered acceptable. The transition from the Core 4 era to what came next has been gradual, marked by the retirements of the players who had defined Yankees baseball for nearly 2 decades. Jorge Posada retired after the 2011 season. Andy Pettitte, the left-handed pitcher who had been part of all those championship teams, retired after 2013. Mariano Rivera's retirement that same year left only Derek Jeter from the original Core 4, and Jeter himself would retire after the 2014 season, ending his 20-year career with a farewell tour that celebrated one of the most successful and beloved players in franchise history. The years following the Core 4's retirements brought uncertainty and transition. Derek Jeter's farewell in 2014 marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that had defined Yankees baseball for 2 decades. The franchise had to reimagine itself, had to find new stars to carry the torch, had to build a roster that could compete for championships without the foundation that had sustained them for so long. The task seemed daunting, the void left by those legendary players almost impossible to fill. But the Yankees, drawing on their rich history of developing talent and their financial resources to supplement homegrown players with strategic acquisitions, began building again. The farm system that had produced the core four was once again developing prospects, identifying young players who could form the foundation of the next competitive Yankees team. And in 2016, one of those prospects made his major league debut, giving Yankees fans their first glimpse of what would become one of the most imposing physical presences the game had ever seen. Aaron Judge stood 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 282 pounds, a giant of a man whose size seemed almost cartoonish standing next to normal-sized ballplayers. He had been drafted by the Yankees in 2013 and had worked his way through the minor league system, developing his skills, learning to harness his tremendous raw power into consistent production. When he arrived in the majors in 2016, he showed flashes of brilliance mixed with struggles, the kind of uneven performance typical of young players adjusting to the highest level of competition. But 2017 was when Aaron Judge truly arrived, when he announced himself not just as a promising prospect, but as a genuine superstar, as the kind of generational talent that could carry a franchise. From the season's first weeks, Judge was hitting home runs at a pace that seemed almost impossible. The balls he hit didn't just clear fences, they launched into the stratosphere, traveling distances that left fans and opposing players alike shaking their heads in disbelief. A home run to the second deck. A home run that landed in the bleachers so far from home plate that it seemed to defy physics. Home run after home run, each one more impressive than the last. By season's end, Judge had hit 52 home runs, breaking the American League rookie record and finishing second in the league's home run race despite it being his first full season. 52 home runs as a rookie. The number was staggering, the kind of achievement that happens once in a generation, that announces the arrival of a truly special player. Judge won Rookie of the Year unanimously, recognition of a season that had exceeded even the most optimistic projections, that had given Yankees fans a new star to rally around. But Judge was more than just power. He played right field with surprising grace for someone his size, covering ground and making plays that players of his stature weren't supposed to be able to make. He hit for average, maintaining a batting average over .280 even while swinging for the fences. And he carried himself with a humility and professionalism that endeared him to teammates and fans, never showboating, never calling attention to himself, simply playing the game with excellence and letting his performance speak for itself. The 2017 Yankees, energized by Judge's emergence and supported by other young talents like Gary Sanchez and Didi Gregorius, exceeded expectations by reaching the American League Championship Series. They weren't supposed to be ready yet, weren't expected to compete for championships while still in the rebuilding phase, but they won 91 games and advanced through the playoffs, ultimately falling to the Houston Astros in 7 games in the ALCS. The loss was disappointing, but the season represented progress, proof that the Yankees were building something sustainable, that the next competitive window was opening. The 2018 season brought more success, with the Yankees winning 100 games and again reaching the playoffs. They faced the rival Red Sox in the division series, losing in 4 games to a Boston team that would go on to win the World Series. The defeats in 2017 and 2018 were frustrating, evidence that the Yankees were close but not quite good enough to reach the championship that had eluded them since 2009. But they had established themselves as perennial contenders again, as a team that would compete for division titles and playoff spots year after year. In 2018, the Yankees hired Aaron Boone as their manager, bringing in a former player whose most famous moment had come wearing pinstripes, that walk-off home run against the Red Sox in the 2003 ALCS. Boone brought an analytical approach to managing, embracing the advanced statistics and metrics that had become central to modern baseball decision-making, while also maintaining the personal relationships with players that were essential to managing personalities and egos in a high-pressure environment like New York. Under Boone's leadership, the Yankees remained competitive year after year. They won division titles, reached the playoffs consistently, fielded rosters loaded with talent that made them among the favorites to win championships. Aaron Judge continued to produce at an elite level, establishing himself as one of the best players in baseball. Garrett Cole, signed as a free agent before the 2020 season to a record 9-year, $324 million contract, gave the Yankees the ace pitcher they had lacked, a dominant starter who could match up against anyone in crucial playoff games. But championships remained elusive. The 2019 season ended with a loss to the Astros in the ALCS. The pandemic-shortened 2020 season ended with a division series loss. The 2021 season ended with a wild card game defeat. The 2022 season brought another ALCS appearance, another defeat, another October ending in disappointment. The pattern was becoming familiar, frustrating. The Yankees were good enough to reach the playoffs, to compete deep into October, but not quite good enough to finish the job, to claim the championship that would validate all the talent and all the investment and all the expectations. Yankees fans, spoiled by decades of championships, by a franchise history that included 27 World Series titles, grew increasingly impatient with playoff defeats. Reaching the ALCS wasn't good enough. Winning division titles wasn't the goal. For the Yankees, success was measured only in championships, and by that standard, every season from 2010 through 2023 had been a failure, regardless of how impressive the regular season records had been or how deep into the playoffs the team had advanced. And then came 2024, a season that would finally break through the barrier, that would deliver the championship Yankees fans had been waiting 15 years to celebrate. The team that took the field that year was talented and balanced, combining veteran leadership with emerging young stars, featuring Aaron Judge in the prime of his career and Garrett Cole anchoring a strong pitching staff. They won 94 games during the regular season, claiming the AL East Division title and entering the playoffs as one of the favorites to reach the World Series. The playoff run was tense, filled with the kind of dramatic moments that October baseball provides. Close games decided by a single run. Pitching duels where runs were precious and every pitch carried enormous weight. Comebacks when the team fell behind. Resilience when momentum seemed to shift against them. But the Yankees kept winning, kept advancing, kept moving closer to the championship that had eluded them for so long. The World Series brought its own drama, its own moments of tension and triumph. The opponent was formidable, the competition fierce, but the Yankees had the talent and the experience and the determination to prevail. When the final out was recorded, when the championship was secured, the celebration was cathartic, a release of 15 years of frustration and disappointment, a vindication of the belief that the Yankees could still win when it mattered most. The 20th championship in franchise history. No other team in baseball was close. The St. Louis Cardinals had 11, the Athletics had 9, the Red Sox had 9. The Yankees stood alone with 28, a total that represented sustained excellence across a century of baseball, that reflected the franchise's commitment to winning, that justified the expectations and the pressure and the constant demand for championships. Aaron Judge, performing at his peak in the 2024 postseason, had delivered the kind of October performances that Derek Jeter had made routine, that Reggie Jackson had specialized in, that Yankees stars had been providing for generations. He had become the face of the franchise, the player who carried the weight of Yankees tradition and championship expectations, and he had delivered when it mattered most. The victory extended the Yankees' unmatched legacy, added another chapter to a story that had been unfolding since 1923 when they won their first championship with Babe Ruth. From Ruth and Gehrig to DiMaggio to Mantle and Berra to Jeter and the core four to Judge in the modern era, the thread remained unbroken, the commitment to excellence maintained across generations of players and managers and ownership. The Yankees' ongoing legacy is built on these championships, on the expectation that winning is not just hoped for but demanded, on the understanding that playing for the Yankees means carrying the weight of history and tradition, of living up to standards set by the greatest players who ever wore pinstripes. It's a burden that crushes some players who can't handle the pressure, who wilt under the scrutiny and the expectations. But for those who embrace it, who rise to the challenge, who deliver championships and create October moments that become part of franchise lore, the Yankees offer a stage unlike any other in baseball. As sleep finally arrives, as consciousness fades and dreams begin, perhaps the last image is Aaron Judge, standing at home plate after a championship-winning moment, celebrating with teammates, holding the World Series trophy aloft, continuing a legacy that stretches back over a century. The Yankees story is far from over. New stars will emerge, new championships will be won, new moments will be created that future generations will remember and celebrate. But the foundation is secure, built on 28 championships and counting, on a tradition of excellence that has made the Yankees synonymous with winning, that has created the most successful franchise in baseball history and one of the most storied organizations in all of professional sports. The pinstripes will continue to be worn by players who dream of adding their own chapters to this history. The interlocking New York logo will continue to be one of the most recognized symbols in sports. Monument Park will continue to honor the legends who came before, and Yankees fans will continue to expect championships, to demand excellence, to measure success only by the ultimate achievement of World Series titles. That's the Yankees way, the standard established over more than a century, the legacy that continues to this day and will continue for generations to come. Sweet dreams of baseball glory, of championship parades through the Canyon of Heroes, of October nights when everything comes together and the Yankees stand alone once more at the pinnacle of their sport.